Hey everyone, welcome to the Bally Alley Astrocast number 6. We'll be covering The Incredible Wizard for the Bally Arcade Astrocade today. The Incredible Wizard is better known as Wizard of Wor for other systems. It is an identical game and it actually was licensed, so we're not really sure about the name change. And when I say we, I'm talking about Michael Di Salvo, who is going to be our new co-host, and Paul Thacker, who's been on most shows, I think, all except the very first one, or episode 0. And I have my first three-way conversation via Skype, which went pretty well. Recording worked okay. I'm happy with it. We'll see how it turns out when Chris mixes everything together and edits this episode together. I do want to thank Chris. Thank you, Chris, for editing all this.
My magic is stronger than your weapons.
Michael spent some time with his young son playing The Incredible Wizard, so he recorded a segment for the show as well, which will follow the actual review of the game. Paul and I, we cover the June and July 1979 issues of the Arcadian newsletter. And I actually this time made a few videos that I've uploaded, and I'll put links to the show notes for. And these videos cover a few of the programs that are covered in the Arcadian issues that we go over. Not every program, but some of them. And these are really simple videos. I basically took my my digital camera, pointed it at the screen, and tried to do the best I could with that. I think I made 3 or 4 videos. So if you're interested to see what a basic program looks like when it's loaded, or played, or used, or listed, that's probably one of the few videos where you'll see on YouTube where you can actually check that out. If you don't have real hardware, that's really going to be your one main way to do it. Paul and I, we also cover 6 letters from the June-July era that were written to Bob Fabris, the editor of the Arcadian. Of course, you'll get to hear feedback from listeners, and thanks for that, guys. And keep it coming. I enjoyed getting it. There's going to be, I'm going to actually read a classic review from that was written by Joe Santulli back in about 1996 for The Incredible Wizard. Lastly, per usual, the show is going to end up with a short song, which was created on the Astrocade. One last thing I'd like to add before we get to the meat of the show is that, there's a lot of music that was written for the Astrocade, but, it's not all about old stuff. If there's anyone who's ever made any music on the Astrocade or is interested in making music, it can be done pretty easily using, if you have real hardware that is, using some software that's out there written for the Astrocade. You'd be doing it using the same method that was used back in the 70s and 80s. But I'd be interested in hearing from people who make some music, and if you send it along to me, maybe I'll play it at the end of the show. That'd be pretty cool, I think. I'd like to hear what people can do with this sound system, which I think is probably the best that was available for a home console or computer at that time period. I first began listening to podcasts about 1.5 years ago. Chris, my former co-host, suggested the 2600 Game by Game podcast. I've still not caught up with all those episodes, but I'm getting pretty close. One of my favorite parts of any podcast, especially Ferg's podcast, are the Christmas holiday memories that people share. I've heard all sorts of great Atari holiday-related stories. I'm sure that there must be some Bally Arcade, Astrocade stories out there. If you're one of those few people who got a Bally Arcade under your Christmas tree on Christmas Day, then I'd love to hear your story. Maybe the Bally was your only system. Maybe you got a Bally Arcade very early on in, say, maybe January 1978. Maybe you got it as a gift while it was on clearance in 1984 for $25. Yeah, there was a time when they cost $25. Possibly you have a 4-player tale of playing 99 rounds of checkmate against your parents and a little sister on Christmas morning. Whatever your tale, if it's holiday related, I'd love to hear it. Please write in and tell us all about it. If you're one of those awesome folks who likes to record audio feedback, then that's of course welcome too. The next episode of the Astrocast will feature this holiday feedback in the December episode. Send it to ballyalley@hotmail.com, or you can also reach me via the Atari Age forums, and I'm Bally Alley.
You're off to see the wizard. The magical Wizard of Wor.
Michael, why don't you give us a little bit of background about your history with the Astrocade?
How much time do we have?
We've got 30 years. Here we go.
Awesome. I was actually, I guess, one of the few lucky kids to actually own one as a youth, if you can call it that. I had to be like maybe 12 or 13.
Okay. And
I had already gotten a 2600.
Never heard of it.
I think it was made by this company called Atari.
Oh.
I think I don't know who owns them now. Yeah, so I remember getting the 2600 and having a bunch of games for that. And literally, I think the first time I saw the Astrocade, actually it was one of the ones with the computer system label on it. We had this toy store. I think it was actually bigger than Toys R Us, at least on Long Island at the time.
Wow.
It was called Playworld.
Oh, I remember Playworld here too, but it wasn't bigger than Toys R Us, that's for sure. Not here in Albuquerque anyway.
Bigger as far as like more popular.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like Toys R Us was the new guy from what I remember.
Okay.
So they had all the video games, and they actually didn't have them out so you could touch them. They had them on a pegboard that was like 30 feet off the ground. Literally, you needed like binoculars to see these things.
Could you ask someone and say, "Hey, can I see, The Incredible Wizard, for instance?" And I want to know what that game is, or do?
I'm thinking it's more like the way like Home Depot and Lowe's is today. When you ask for help.
Yeah. Oh, when you don't get anything.
I don't remember. I don't remember if you could or you couldn't. Okay. Well, the other thing too is you got to figure at 12. I couldn't have been that tall either, so
not 30
I guess it just added to it, right? But anyway, they had it mounted, and I don't know, that thing just looked amazing compared to the Atari. You had the smoke dust cover, and you had these crazy, looked like almost half a gun kind of controller to it.
Sure, the trigger.
And they had, I guess, a lot of the games on display as far as the boxes. So even though it didn't say Space Invaders. You knew it was Space Invaders. Yeah. Even though it didn't say Galaxian, you knew it was Galaxian. And I saw literally so many of them looked just like arcade ports. And I was like, I gotta get that. And to this day, I have no idea what con I must have done to get mom and dad to actually pick one up.
Can I back up? So was there, how there's the Astrocade kiosk, which was like was there one of those there on display, or did you just you were going by the front cover art of the game? Or I guess the games actually do have a kind of the boxes have a I guess a screenshot of sorts. I think it's an artist rendition, but kind of gives you an idea.
No kiosk. I don't think I'd ever seen a kiosk of any of the game systems except for I think I did go to one. I don't know if it was still called the Consumer Electronics Show, but there was some kind of game / computer show. Okay. We had a place on Long Island. It was called Nassau Coliseum. They used to play hockey there. There's a team called the Islanders.
Yeah, I remember them because I was born in Long Island actually. So.
Okay, so do you remember Nassau Coliseum?
Well, no, because I moved away when I was 2. But my family lived there, and I remember Nassau and all that stuff. But no, I remember the Islanders because everyone back then was watching hockey. So,
gotcha.
Anyway, yeah.
So it was at like so the Coliseum had a lot of different events. Think of it as like Long Island's version of Madison Square Garden. Mm-hmm. Okay. They had their systems out of the box, like zip tied to like this, like I said, this pegboard hanging like 20 or 30 feet off the ground. So you could actually see the console. It wasn't. It was out of the box.
Huh. That must have been one of the units that had overheated. They're like, we'll just hang this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you got to figure it's definitely not on a carpet.
Well, there you go. It's safe.
Yeah. There you go.
So the look of the system actually influenced your decision?
Yeah, I just, to me it was different from everything else, and I think when I got mine, I don't think ColecoVision had come out yet. It might have been being advertised. Like in the gaming magazines and stuff.
Yeah.
But, and I wound up getting a lot of I got Astro Battle. What's the Galaxians again? Galactic Invasion?
Yeah. Astro Battle is Space Invaders.
Right. But believe it or not, up until Incredible Wizard came out, my favorite game on that, I loved football.
I've never played football.
I haven't played much either. I think you actually have to kind of learn how to input the different offensive and defensive maneuvers, don't you? Like got a whole playbook.
Yeah, you get the playbook, but it's for playing it with 2 people, especially with the crowd, where it does like the crowd roaring.
Yeah.
I mean, like that was the greatest thing. And you could pass. I don't remember I don't remember playing football on Atari, if there even was. So
were you playing against the computer, or did you have a brother or something, or a sister maybe that you were playing against, or dad? Or?
Well, when you're like the only kid that has 2 video games, people tend to come to your house. So, definitely playing with other kids and stuff.
Okay.
With friends at the time and stuff. I would have been in probably 7th or 8th grade. So I don't think we had figured out girls yet. So,
You knew they existed.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I
so
have
we
to
were
be
still
honest
playing
with you.
games.
I still haven't figured out women, so my wife.
Yeah, neither have I.
so.
But
You're asking for trouble.
I guess I must have gotten it right around the time when was it Astrovision?
Yeah.
And then they changed the name to Astrocade.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden now you've got ads on TV. And of course, I'm sitting there and I'm like, wait a second, what's this Astrocade? Mine says, computer system. I'm like, I want that one. I think, it was a great time for them to come back, so to speak, as far as with the ads and everything. I just think it was too, I think the timing was
system
bad.
at that point.
Right. Because then all of a sudden you had ColecoVision and the Atari 5200.
Yeah.
And I think it just kind of got, pushed off to the side. But
well, how long was it carried there? I mean, were you able to purchase games for a while, or did they disappear right away, or were you able to always find them?
Aside from Play Worlds, we also had the famous, or I guess infamous, Crazy Eddie's.
Okay, sure.
They were like the electronic chain on the island.
In New York City too, because that's where I used to go to the woods in the city.
In the city, they had these crazy commercials. Definitely look it up on YouTube.
Their prices are insane.
Insane, yes. So was their business model.
Yeah.
I mean, when your former CEO has to run off to Israel, hiding from the FBI and stuff like that, there's something wrong with the business.
Get a video game for Christmas! It's Crazy Eddie's greatest Christmas sale ever! And Crazy Eddie's going video game crazy for Christmas with the absolute lowest prices anywhere in all your favorite video games. Atari, Odyssey 2, and Television, Astrocade, Vectrex, Arcadia, ColecoVision. Crazy Eddie's got them all! All the latest game cartridges too! All at the absolute lowest prices anywhere. Crazy Eddie's your video game center, the only place to buy video games and game cartridges. So get a video game for Christmas now! You're in Crazy Eddie's greatest Christmas sale ever! His prices are insane!
So Crazy Eddie was right across the street actually from Play Worlds, and the way they were set up was like the moment you walked in, you had your Atari computers, you had your 2600, you had your ColecoVision, and they carried. I'm almost positive they carried it as well. I don't remember which Bally they had, but I could actually buy the games from them too.
Okay.
So for a while at least, there were a couple of places other than mail order.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In order to be able to pick things up.
Did you actually do mail order?
The one game that I bought was Castle of Horror.
Oh, a tape game.
That was the only tape game that I ever bought.
Okay.
Only because
the Arcadian.
I had a subscription to something. I think it was Electronic Gaming Monthly.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a website where you can look up like the past issues.
Sure, yeah.
It's funny because when I was looking at it, there were a lot of different covers that looked really familiar. I'm pretty sure there was some place in there that was selling the Bally, as far as the tapes. Maybe it was even Wave Makers, right? Because weren't they the ones that published that?
They were, but Electronic Games, they got together, or not Electronic Games, but like several of the manufacturers got together, like Richard Hauser, Wave Makers, I think New Image, and a few others, and they pooled their resources, and they made a quarter-page ad that was in the back of several of the issues. That's how the...
Okay.
Yeah, I know that for sure. There might have been more, but at least that. But Wave Makers was in that ad, so
okay.
You could have heard of them from that.
Yeah, that's where it might have been. And... that, like I said, that was the only tape game that I remember buying and actually owning. I might have programmed a handful of games from, the book that comes with...
Bally Basic?
I don't know if it was Bally Basic or if it was Astro Basic. There was a promo when you bought the console that you got Basic for free. You had to,
was Astro
mail
Basic.
in for it.
Yeah, that was Astro Basic, yep.
And...
were you able to save successfully, or do you type them in and you never saw them again?
No. I everybody's dad back in the day had that typical shoebox kind of tape recorder.
Yeah.
So that went from being dad's tape recorder to my backup for the console. But yeah, I remember connecting it. I remember recording the stuff to it, and then actually loading a game and everything. And it was great if you had a couple of hours to kill.
Well, so can you remember actually going back, because I haven't spoken to anyone who's actually from that time period in the 80s, bought a tape and played it. So how did it compare in your eyes to other games? Because I mean, they're not the same. They're not on the same quality level, but did you think it was fun, or you were like, what is this?
So I've always been the guy who's always wanted, the stuff that's more realistic, more, the better. I originally had the 2600, then got the Bally computer system, and I actually sold my Atari collection to buy the ColecoVision.
Oh, okay.
So you know what I mean? I was like trying to trade up.
Yeah, that's how that's how I got my Commodore 64. I traded,
Right.
well, not traded, I sold it at a
Right.
yard sale. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we had a thing on one of the cable providers, actually at the time the only cable provider that I remember, called Cablevision, and they actually had this thing called Swap and Shop. So they had a channel that was like dedicated to garage sales or stuff that you wanted to sell.
Really? Kind of like a Craigslist before
cool.
Craigslist.
Yeah, it was great. So you could write up your ad and then you call it in, and I guess you dictated it to them over the phone, and then it would run for like the whole weekend.
Okay.
So it was great.
Oh,
I remember, having people come to look at the Atari and buy it. Of course, now, in hindsight, really want to go back and tell that kid, dude, don't sell this stuff. Find another way.
Yeah.
Because man, I had, Indy 500 and what was it? The original heavy sixer. And
Sixer, sure.
all the game, and I saved all the boxes. I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I sold that thing. But
I don't.
So anyway,
that's something I don't actually regret thinning out my system, because I feel like there's only so many games you can play. I mean, would you be playing Indy 500 this week? You think this month, this year? Probably not, right? So
Yeah.
I mean,
But did you buy Indy 500 again for far more money?
That's the problem. So anyway, the only thing that stinks is I really wish that I had actually maybe gotten into computers back then. Mm-hmm. I work in IT now. I've worked in IT for over 15 years. So I do not programming. I do the hardware aspect of it, desktop support.
like the help desk kind of thing?
I would be after the help desk. So when the help desk can't help you, which often they can't,
Yes.
then I'm the guy that goes out to, try to figure it out in person.
Okay.
But, like I said, it would have been great to have gotten into computers back then, instead of just playing the games. So, loading the game from tape, to me, that was cool.
Yeah.
Even programming some of the games from BASIC. But, God, that keyboard, man, that keypad, you make one little mistake.
Yeah.
In a line of code, and then all of a sudden, wait, it doesn't work.
Well, you have to remember, that's not the keyboard's fault. That's the user input. That's from you. That was you, Michael.
Right. So it would have been great if they had ever come out with the add-on.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure I definitely would have gone to, grandparents, aunts, uncles, hey, pull your resources. I need this.
Sure.
Either that, or if I had even found out about the groups.
Did you even know about like the Viper or Blue Ram expansions?
No, see that, and I don't know if I would have been able to get it, but having a keyboard to be able to type, even something in, I think that would have been pretty cool. So, like I said, you load the game, you're playing a basic game, and have you guys ever played Castle of Horror?
Yes. Yeah. It's not that great of a game, actually.
So that could have had something to do with it too. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's fun for like 5 seconds, and you're like, that's it.
Yeah, well, the control in that's actually, I actually happen to know that Mike Peace, who wrote that game for Wavemakers, that's his favorite game of all of his games. But it's actually one of my least favorite because the control it's really hard to control, and it's a difficult game to play. It's a great idea, but it would have been implemented much better as a cartridge game because of the speed difference and more colors and all that stuff. But
yeah,
I think if they had done almost something along the lines of, okay, so even if they didn't come out with a keyboard add-on, even though I never had one, I always thought the Star Path supercharger, or was it Arcadian supercharger for the 2600?
Yeah,
that to me would have been really cool. Imagine if we had some kind of like, add-on for the the Bally that you could have loaded the games from tape, but it also would have given you expanded RAM and.
Well, there was. That's basically kind of what the Blue RAM expansion was. It like because I have a supercharger and I have the Stella Gets a New Brain CD collection for it, or both of them. I think a couple of versions of it, and they make the games a lot better. And the Blue RAM expansion, which, depending on which version you had, it could add 4K or 16K, or I think the 32K, there was a few of those out. But if you use that with Blue RAM Basic, you could basically have almost cartridge quality games, I think. What do you think of that, Paul? Do you agree with that, or am I way off base here?
It was definitely approaching that. You'd get some more colors. Something like, Wavemaker's did a version of Outpost 19. So I don't know if it really ever quite felt like a cartridge game. It almost felt more like a more colorful basic game. Okay. But, it's kind of hard to say, like, what could you have done with that if it got more popular?
Yeah. And I guess something to mention is that a lot of these basic games, when they had any machine language routines built in, the ads always said cartridge quality. So, whether it was cartridge quality or not, all was in the mind of the advertiser, probably,
Yeah, I guess the problem with doing those is like it still is running through a basic interpreter unless you really are doing it in machine language.
Yeah.
So like it's more colorful and you can save more things, but it's not actually going to do the processing any faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple of friends with, if not a Commodore 64, I think the VIC 20.
Yeah.
Right. Honestly, probably the biggest influence, and maybe that's if I had spent more time with them, maybe I would have gotten into computers, was my aunt and uncle lived in Massachusetts, and my uncle had the color computer, TRS-80, and they had I guess a club, so they would, make copies of the games. They had, I guess, a program to rip the, what do you call it? Because some of the TRS-80 games were on cartridge. They had, I guess they had a club where they would buy one copy and then everybody would make a copy of it. So, whenever we went to visit, he was online. I don't remember what it was back then. I don't know if it was just a bulletin board or something like that, but we played like some games online. So, yeah, if anybody would have gotten me into computers, it would have been my uncle. For whatever reason, it didn't happen.
When did you finally get into them?
When I was like 24, 25.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my first computer was a Toshiba laptop with a 486 SX processor, floppy drive, VGA, color.
Well, so that's a good start, actually, yeah.
That was a good start.
Yeah. And
of course, the first thing I did was buy an external sound card and start buying games.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you get your Astrocade. You've had it for a while. Yeah. How long did you use it for? Did you use it throughout the 80s? Did you give up on it after you got your ColecoVision? How long did you use it?
No, I think I kept that one the longest. I think I actually eventually sold it to one of the neighboring kids that used to come over and play with it. But the sad thing was I do remember selling some stuff off. Like I actually remember selling the game that we're talking about tonight. And I think that was an ad that I put in the paper for like the whole set. And the guy was like, nope, it's the only game I want. And I sold, like probably the best game that I had. Maybe that's why I wound up selling the whole thing later on. Other than one repair, when I actually had to send the console back.
Oh, so you're one of those lucky people.
Yeah, I never remember seeing anything in there that said, don't play it on the carpet.
Yeah.
Okay, and I definitely had carpet in the basement. So whenever it died, it definitely got fixed.
Did you have to pay for it, or his parents pay for it, or was it free, or do you remember?
As far as I remember, it was under the warranty.
Okay.
I think maybe you had to pay shipping.
Okay.
That would have been about it. The controls lasted, everything lasted on it, up until I sold it. So, again, another regret, but what are you going to do?
Hey, you've got another one.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a couple of them now, right?
I have way too many.
You can never have too many.
Yeah.
So do you want to move on to start talking about the Wizard of Wor? Or, excuse me, the Incredible Wizard?
When you load the game, it doesn't even say Incredible, it just says The Wizard.
That is true. It is. They had to save some bytes.
That would have taken more bytes, yeah.
Is that what it is?
Probably so.
Try explaining it to my 8-year-old. I thought the game's Incredible Wizard, Dad. Just hit button 1.
Yeah.
Well, this game was released in 1982. According to the manual, it was created by Tom McHugh, Scott Norris, and Julie Mullen. which is a little interesting because I thought it was written by Bob Ogden. Because I remember reading in an interview that he wrote it, but I don't know why the manual would lie. Scott Norris, he did almost all the music and sound for most of the cartridge releases that were by Bally or Astrovision, I think. For all the listeners out there who haven't seen a box for an Astrocade game before, they're all the exact same box, and there's a manual that has that you place in the front, and there's clear plastic that goes over across the front of the box, and then you can see the front of the manual, which is kind of like the cover of the box. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
That's how it works.
Which, to me, brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
They were ahead of their time.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And so rather than looking at the back of the box to see a screenshot and get a description of the game, right on the front of the manual, it tells you what to expect from the game. And I'm actually going to read that right now. It's very short. The Incredible Wizard, 2017, which is, I guess, the model number or part number or something like that. Challenge the Incredible Wizard and his creatures in their own environment. Treacherous dungeons. Slip through the magic door to the other end of the dungeon, but prevent the super monster. The super monster? What the hell's that? From escaping through it. Shoot the Incredible Wizard and escape and experience the tremor of the entire dungeon as his magic wavers. Become a warlord and play Warlord Dungeons, even go all the way to the pit. Fantastic sounds and bonus plays make the Incredible Wizard just like coin-op games. So that's what you saw, Michael. Basically, you said you looked at these front of these boxes and that made you want to purchase the systems.
Yeah, well, except in this case, because I'm a fan of Wizard of Wor. I remember playing it in the arcades. I remember looking for it in the arcades. To me, it was awesome. Any of the games that talked, to me was that was cool.
I never saw.
You know what I mean?
Still have never. I do know what you mean. I remember thinking that Berserk was very clever because of. I probably didn't think it was clever. I probably thought it was really cool. I thought it was. I remember the first time I ever experienced it. I didn't get to play it. I watched people play. I was in a bowling alley or a skating rink or something. I think it was a skating rink actually, and I remember hearing this video game talking, and I was like, "What is going on over there?"
Yeah. I'm thinking it might have been the first time I ever played it. We had it was an amusement pier in New Jersey. It was in Long Branch, and if you look it up, they were known for the Haunted Mansion. They actually had a mansion called the Haunted Mansion, and it burned down. The whole pier burned down, I think in the 80s. But at the time, it was phenomenal. They used to advertise, they had bumper boats, they had a saltwater pool, but the main attraction was the Haunted Mansion at Long Branch, where you actually went through it, and, they had people dressed up in costume. The moment you walk into the place, the very first thing is like the Grim Reaper, and you think it's just a statue, and then he comes at you with is it a scythe or a sickle? No, it would have been a scythe, right? The big one? Sickle was just like the little handheld thing, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was great. It scared the hell out of you. So they had an arcade. Any place that was trying to make money back in the 80s, if you didn't have an arcade, forget it. And
or even just a small game room. I mean, every place had a small little game room for you to play something.
And I remember playing Wizard of Wor, and I was like, that's incredible. That game is is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So obviously, if that's the arcade game for me, I got to have that for a home system. And I think it was also part of the advertising.
It was when they at least in the ad, one of the ads I saw. Yeah.
Right. So so you had to have that. But what's funny is if you look at the the manual, the artwork for the game is horrible.
Yeah, it's not the greatest. I was going to talk about that, yeah.
It's like Odyssey 2-ish. not trying to knock the Odyssey 2 or anything, but literally, that's got to be like a mock-up that like somebody drew with, I don't know, crayon.
Yeah, that's clearly not a screenshot.
Oh, yeah.
No, the artwork, awesome. It reminds me of the kind of artwork that you saw in the Atari boxes.
It does have a bit of cheesiness to it. I have to say. There's like the background, like it looks like that someone took colored pencils and drew in the monsters in the background there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like in the actual.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then again, this
look
is
at the mustache on that wizard. That's kind of crazy.
That's how they get their magic power.
You have to. The mustache and the beard, of course.
Exactly.
You wouldn't have Gandalf and all the other guys.
Yeah. So what else we got to say here? Anything else to say about the documentation is by Scott Norris and Dave Armstrong. So that's the manual, which is actually, the manual is really well written. I kind of tried to sum it up, and I don't think I'm going to go through it all. It's way too long. But it's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4.
You want to talk about the story to this? Because I was kind of shocked reading the story that, you're basically invading the wizard's maze. A player is referred to as a warrior, as he or she is in the dungeons of war, the wizard's homeland. In 2-player mode, both players play at the same time in the same maze. Their adversaries are the wizard and his pets, the warlings. So it struck me that, you never really try to justify in the manual why you're going and invading the wizard's home and killing his pets.
It's that mustache. It's the mustache.
Yeah, my theory is that you are the bad guy in this game.
Well, maybe you are. I mean, you are. And if they're his pets, I mean, that is kind of an awful thing to do. He's got, his pets actually, why don't I name what they are? He's got, four of them, I guess. He's got a Boar War, which I kind of summarized what they are here. The Boar War is a hopping monster. It's the first creature that you encounter. It's a blue. It's worth 10 points. He's the slowest monster in the maze, and he's always visible, because some monsters can be visible and some can't. After you destroy all of the Boar War, or at least one, because none of them get replaced until you destroy them or kill them, whatever you want to call it. You get something called the Garwar, which is called the Chomping Monster. It's yellow and it's worth 20 points. And he's only visible when the player is in the same corridor as the monster, which basically so you can't see around corners. That's how it works. You can always see them. There's a radar in the screen, kind of like Defender, sort of. It doesn't show the maze walls or anything, but it gives you an idea of where the monsters are. A third creature is called the Thor War. It's called the Lightning Monster. He's the fastest, which is why he's considered the Lightning Monster. And he's only visible in the same manner as the Garwar. These are kind of silly names. I feel like I'm just talking about Pokemon or something like that, because with all their weird names. This guy is worth 50 points. And after you destroy and clear out the dungeon, you get something called a Warlock, which is... actually, what these names remind me of...
They just put war into everything, don't they?
Yes, they do. There's W-O-R. Oh, by the way, in case people aren't familiar with the Wizard of Wor, it's not spelled W-A-R, it's spelled W-O-R. So everything like the Boar War ends with W-O-R. The Gar War, it ends with W-O-R. The Warlock starts with W-O-R. The Wizard, however, starts with W-I-Z. So the Warlock appears, it's a flying monster. It appears after you've destroyed everything else in the dungeon. And it starts roaming around the dungeon really quickly, but you can avoid it, but it's trying to escape. And if it escapes the dungeon, then you lose a chance to double your scores for the next dungeon. So if you were to destroy, say, the Thor War in the next dungeon, after you've doubled your score, you get 100 points instead of 50. So it's pretty actually important to make sure you destroy all these baddies that can give you the bonus points. And
and the wizard especially is pretty hard to destroy because he's throwing lasers in every direction.
That's correct. He appears on random. I think it's randomly.
I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to it. I was playing it earlier. He actually came out in the second dungeon.
Yeah, I remember playing earlier today. It took maybe 4 or so levels before we even saw the wizard.
This game has a maze, so I guess if a listener was to think of that and you were to picture a Pac-Man maze, it's not too far off, right? That's kind of a way to think of it. And you're
it's not as tightly packed, but yeah.
Yeah.
And they change every level.
They do change every level. When I was playing this back in the spring for the High Score Club, I don't know how many levels there are altogether. The manual doesn't say, but I not on my own, but playing it in the MAME emulator for the Astrocade, I was able to take screenshots of 20 different dungeon levels. So that's quite a few. I don't know if there's more, but that's as many as I decided I was going to play through. Because sometimes they come in a random order. Like the first one isn't always the same. It's just they're totally random which one you get, which I think is pretty cool. It makes it more interesting. Except for there's one dungeon called the Pit that has it's mostly open and it's not too much of a maze, and it makes it very difficult because the monsters can get you very easily. And I think that's always the 4th dungeon. I think.
Yeah.
Something
Although
like
it is
that.
easy to see them that way.
It is. It is. So you guys, I enjoy this game.
Oh yeah, definitely. Even if people don't know it from the arcade, if you have any of the games where you're 2-player co-op,
Co-op?
even if
This game's not co-op. This is competitive, man.
when I played with my son, we had a rule: don't shoot me. It didn't really work that way, but
Yeah, you do actually score points for shooting your opponent.
yeah, I know that's really messed up. But you know what I mean? Like that to me is awesome. I mean, plus you're playing it on a system where one of the only ones I remember that allowed you to play with up to 4 people. Granted, not with this game,
not this
but
game, yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
It's just like I said. It's too bad that they started releasing all these games when they did. That they didn't release it sooner. But me personally, I think this is probably the best game on the system. I think it's the best arcade port on the system, and compared to other versions on other systems, I would need somebody to show me something better than this.
There is, and I don't think there is another version that's better than this. Even if you count like the Commodore 64 version or the Atari 800 version. I should be biased for the Commodore 64 version because I played that growing up in the 80s. That was one of my favorite games for the system.
Gotcha.
And I eventually got the cart in the 90s. I got it on a cartridge, and I got something called the Magic Voice, which it was like this speech synthesis system that you plugged into the back of your Commodore 64. You plugged the Wizard of Wor into it, and then it would talk. It still wasn't as good. It looked closer to the arcade version because the Astrocade has a quarter of the resolution of the arcade version, but it plays, in my opinion, closer than any other version.
Right.
They've actually always got this at the Louisville Arcade Expo, the arcade machine. So I played it there, and yeah, I do think the gameplay is really similar. I mean, definitely you can tell the increased resolution and the voices are cool in the arcade, but gameplay-wise, I think they nailed it.
Yeah, I guess we should say there are no voices in this game on the Astrocade. There's no voice at all.
It's too bad we didn't get a speech add-on for the system.
Yeah,
when everybody else was jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah,
they should have. Craig Anderson should have made that along with the computer ear or something.
I was gonna say, you got an ear, you need speech to go with that.
Right. Yeah. Although one of the I keep bringing up the C64, but that was the system I grew up with. So I had something called SAM, which was it stood for Software Automatic Mouth, and it was just a disc that I got, and I did not purchase it. I was given it by a friend, and anything you typed, it would just say, and it was just software speech synthesis, but it sounded pretty good. And I've wondered, and it seems to me that the Astrocade is powerful enough to be able to do something like that if someone was, smart enough to, I guess, make it happen.
Well, the Odyssey 2 had a speech add-on, right?
Yeah, it did. The voice.
That's the voice.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like you could do something like that if you wanted to.
Actually, I think it was you that you got like steering wheels that fit over the
wheels. Yeah, the steering wheels for 280 Zap, and then it also came with I guess the Bally version of that Ball check device.
Yep.
Not the cool looking ones that you have.
Yeah.
I have the one that looks like it was made from a kit from Radio Shack.
Yeah, actually, it doesn't even look that good. I think, if I remember, it looks pretty hacked up.
It's like a metal box kit. It's like a kit, and they just cut holes in it.
Yeah.
The cool thing is the board is nutting. It says Nutting Associates,
wow.
so it's not like a breadboard. You know what I mean? It definitely looks like something that was made.
Yeah, mine is made by, it's the version, both of them, because I have 2 of them, and they're by RGB Electronics, which was Richard Belton's company, and he made those, And for listeners, what we're talking about, by the way, is something that would plug. It was a device that would plug into the 50-pin connector in the back of the Astrocade, so you could check what was wrong with your unit. And they're pretty rare. And while I fired mine up, I've never really used it to diagnose anything. But.
Yeah, I'd say. I mean, I connected it to one of the consoles that already had the piece. The cover for the connector popped off. But I don't know if it. I mean, it turned on. Yeah. It blinked and stuff. Numbers came up, but
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do with it.
So I wrote down some tips while I was playing the game. These are just things that came to me, about 8 of them or something here. I'm going to read them off, and if you guys have anything to add while I'm saying them, please let me know. My first one, I think I've already mentioned, but it's if the warlock escapes after you've destroyed everything, and after you've destroyed all the baddies in the dungeon, the wizard can still appear, even if he escapes. So it's not like he escapes and then the wizard won't come. Once the game starts, the baddies... I'm calling the baddies, but the wizard's minions, okay?
Right.
About every 10 to 20 seconds, they get a little faster. If you destroy one of his minions, then any shot that they have fired disappears. The Gar Wars, they only appear after you've destroyed the first monsters. After you've killed the warlock, the little flying guy that comes after you've destroyed everyone in the dungeon, you'll know that the wizard is coming in one of 2 ways. You can keep firing shots, or you can keep moving around. Now, because there's kind of this pause, and if you can keep moving, the wizard's coming, and that's a good thing to know, because he can close in on you by kind of teleporting around a maze, sort of, I guess is what he's doing.
Right.
And he doesn't move around the maze like the rest of the monsters. He gets closer and closer to you until he zaps you, or you zap him, basically.
Yeah, and you want to try to kind of get in a safe spot, because he'll be firing at you almost as soon as he appears.
Yeah. Is there a part of the maze that you consider safe? I don't know of a safe spot.
Yeah. I mean, I won't say anything's completely safe, but if you get more in a corner, then there's like fewer angles you can get you from.
That makes sense.
There definitely are parts in some of the mazes that you can kind of hide out. Like if you're playing a single player, it doesn't always work. Obviously, playing it with 2 people, if you can team up, to me that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
What I usually try to do in the maze to try to make it easier is I try to go to any part of the maze where you can see from completely the left side of the screen or the right side of the screen. You know what I mean? Where there's nothing in the middle, nothing blocking you or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Because
you get a clean shot.
Some mazes have that more than others, but
Right.
Yeah.
Because the other thing you got to remember too is in this game, when you shoot, you can't fire again until either you've hit something or that shot has hit a wall.
Right. Yeah.
So you can get caught. Like all of a sudden you have that freakishly fast. What's he called? The Thor War? The red guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thor War.
I am Thor. Thor War. Yes. Thor War. Impossible, man. When they go like 20 million miles an hour. He'll just come right up and just run right over you.
Yeah, as the levels progress, because after for the listeners, after you clear each screen and you've either the wizard appears or it doesn't, and after you've gotten past the warlock, all the baddies come back and you've gone to a second level and third level, etc. And the maze changes and the baddies get faster. And as the game progresses, they get really, really, really fast, and I mentioned,
it gets pretty hard.
It gets really hard pretty quickly too, and I can. When Chris, my former co-host, was playing this with me back in the spring, what we would do as 2 players, and I'm wondering if you guys did this, is we'd put our backs against each other in the game, I guess, and we'd sort of find a place that worked out, and then would fire from both directions, and that works out pretty well for a 2-player game.
Yeah, I feel like we'd kind of divide the maze into like the left half and the right half, or the top and the bottom, or something like that.
Okay.
Just try to stay out of each other's way. But yeah, that's an interesting strategy.
Let's see what else we got. Okay, now here's something I was wondering about you guys. I put here, a slight gentle touch on the controller will allow you to move your warrior's direction, but not move him into that direction. And it kind of took me a little while, because I have several different controllers I can use with my Astrocade. I have an NES controller I can use with it that I have hooked up, an Atari 2600 controller, or get this, an Astrocade controller. And I actually found that the Astrocade controller probably works best for this game, because I feel like you can just barely touch it and you'll move your player's direction where he's going to fire his gun, and not anything else. So. And it's really important because, especially when you get into cramped places in the maze, the wizard's minions will come at you, and you've got to be able to turn on a dime pretty
Yeah,
quickly.
you can kind of step right into one of them if you're not careful.
Yeah, very easily. And here's something that's interesting. If there's 2 of the wizard's minions and they're on top of one another, they sort of turn into this mess of pixels. They kind of look like they threw up on each other or something. I don't know. But usually, but not always, I've noticed, one shot will take them both out. Have you guys noticed that?
Maybe. I'm usually just, like I said, one of the reasons why I like when there's a big straightaway, I'll just stand there and just fire it and hope that they get sucked into, like my line of fire. Hopefully not one of them comes up from behind and kills you.
So, well, I mean, obviously you're looking at the radar, so you know if that's going to happen. At least
I'm not. You know what? It's not always that easy to spot them on the radar because the radar just is a big. It's just a big box, but it doesn't show the
really
maze
small.
in the radar.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It just shows a little blip.
Yeah, I feel like if you got really good at this, you'd be able to look at the radar and the maze and know exactly where everything was, but I've never gotten that good at it.
Yeah. I agree with Paul. I think that you're probably right. I can't do that either, but it at least gives you a rough estimate, even as a beginner, of like you're going to know if they're like, if you're in the northeast quadrant of the maze and they're on the other, like if there's a few baddies running around, especially when there's only one running around, because sometimes that's the worst because...
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I go to try to hunt them out with the radar and then they end up just appearing practically on top of me.
Yeah, well, that's because they run it, like, especially later, they get so fast. They move around the maze so quickly, so...
Which maze is the one that's invisible completely?
Is
that the pit?
It's not completely. It's not. I mean, there's some walls, but hardly any walls. Is that what you mean? Right? I think there's some
like
walls.
a big open area in the center.
Yeah.
Wait, isn't there one that's completely invisible, or is that just the arcade?
If there's one in the Astrocade, I've not seen it. I mean, there's a part there. They call it. I don't think. I'm gonna look at.
I could have sworn that there is one that is completely.
What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna look at all the screenshots that I made for the high school.
Oh, here it is.
Let's see.
Actually, it's on Atari Age, and it's in the high score.
That's what I'm looking at right now.
I just found it here. Yeah, completely invisible.
I took that screenshot too then because, let's see.
But here's the crazy thing.
Oh, yeah, it says you're looking at the screenshot where the points are 13,770? Yep, that's me.
But here's the crazy thing. The walls are invisible, but they're still there. Either that, or if you notice, you see the way they're walking? Mm-hmm. It's not like one big open play field, if I remember. It looks like it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, they
still kind of act like they're in a maze.
Yes,
but
that's the problem.
Yeah, they don't have free movement. I mean, they only can turn like as if
up,
like
right, left, down. The warlock, you want to prevent him from escaping, so you always want to head through that pass through.
Oh, the magic door.
Wormhole passage, whatever that is.
Yep.
Because if you go through it, then it prevents him from escaping.
I guess, why don't you describe for our listeners, because we didn't actually bring
everybody's probably like, wow, did he just take an acid hit? No. The game has a pass-through, like Pac-Man, so you can go from the left side of the maze to the right side of the maze. The difference being in an Incredible Wizard, you can only pass through it. So it's almost like the Stargate. So you can go through one way, you come out the other side, but then it shuts down for a little bit.
Yeah.
So the whole point is that when you've defeated all the, I'm going to try this, the Burr War, the Gar Wars, and the Thor Wars.
Clap, clap.
And the Warlock.
The Warlock shows up and basically tries to escape the maze. So if you, like I said, if you go through the, what do they call it? I'm sure they don't call it the pass-through.
I think they call it the magic door, actually.
Really?
I'm not joking. Here, it even says it right in the menu. Here, let's see. Magic door.
Ah, me lucky charms, come through the magic door. Wow. Okay, so I'm not going to call it the magic door. When you go through the portal, okay, if as soon as that thing shows up, go through the portal, come out on the other side, try to kill it before the portal reappears, because then that can escape again.
That's a good strategy. I've never done that before.
Yeah.
Paul, have you done?
And obviously it's easier with two people because then you guys just stand at either side and.
Oh yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Well, I will do that next time I play. So I think that is all I have to say about this game. If I was gonna, I mean, we don't usually rate games because Chris is anti-rating games, so we never really did that before.
Beware.
I'd say it's probably my favorite game on the system. I'm just going to say it is my favorite game on the system. It's great fun to play with two players. I don't think it holds its... I mean, graphically, it's one of the best games for the system. I think it has the best sounds for the system. I think it's a much better two-player game than a one-player game.
Yeah, I definitely had more fun with it playing two players.
Yeah, I'll give it that. Any time that you can play with somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just so few games on the Astrocade like that.
Yeah.
Right.
What did your son think of it?
He thought it was pretty cool. He didn't actually want to stop playing, but we were like an hour into it.
Wow.
And we were on like our 28th take. No, he thought it was pretty cool. He's really like the junior gamer now. You know what I mean? He's really into his 3DS, and he's really into his Wii U. He started playing some of my Xbox stuff, and he's beating stuff that I haven't. So he's already beyond me.
Yeah.
So you throw a controller in his hand and tell him, hey, here's a game that you can play. He was into it. He definitely would like to play it.
What did he think of the
I may have a problem now.
Did he have a
with,
trouble?
Well, that was the funny thing was, he's not used to that. Everything that's that we pretty much have today, they're all the game pads with the little thumbsticks.
Yeah.
So he was actually trying to use the knob with his thumb. And I was like, here, hold it like this, like it's a little tiny joystick. Mm-hmm. And I think he did better.
Yeah. This younger generation. I mean? This younger generation.
Yeah.
Kids these days.
That's it. But I'm still an advocate that pistol grip controller, also the best controller of its time.
That I'm going to have to disagree with, because if you're playing, I have to, because if you're playing a game where you're doing a lot of firing with that trigger, my index finger, it gets tired. It really does. It does.
Then you got to do the exercises. Come on.
The pistol grip exercise.
Yes.
What are you talking about?
Come on, dude. You can squeeze that trigger like there's no tomorrow. That trigger is. I had to repair my trigger back in the day. I actually had to open the
That's
handle.
Because you're exercising your index finger. You're not supposed to do that.
And bend it back into shape to get it to work again.
What?
No, yeah. No, come on. It's a pistol grip.
Yeah.
It's textured.
It's
literally like a gun. It actually reminds me of the gun handle from somewhere. I don't remember from what game. Maybe it was even Outlaw.
I think it's Gunfight, yeah.
Gunfight, okay. The joystick's internal. You have the knob on the top, and you have the addition of the paddle to it.
I agree with the setup. I don't agree with where you got to fire from. It's
time
so hard
to pump you up. We have to get you back to the gym.
There's a couple of things I want to point out for people who might be interested in reading some more stuff about this. There's an article called Video Games, New Life for Your Atari 2600 from April 1983 by Danny Goodman. It's from a magazine called Radio Electronics, and it covers the Atari 2600, Supercharger, Pac-Man for the 5200, and there's a nice little review of the Incredible Wizard, which I highlighted a couple things from this I wanted to read. It's just, I'm not going to read the whole review, which is actually pretty short, but here we go. It starts off, life for the Astrocade, formerly the Bally Arcade console, and its owners has not been easy as of late. For one thing, there have always been some pretty slim pickings when it came to cartridges. For another, the manufacturers, Astrocade Incorporated's precarious financial situation, which has become common knowledge in these past few months, has put the future of the machine in doubt. However, to paraphrase Mark Twain, reports of his death may have been greatly exaggerated. The company, at press time, and remember, this is April 1983, I think I said? Yeah. The company at press time was undergoing reorganization and is hopeful that it can continue producing the console and even introduce some new cartridges in the near future. In any event, most of the cartridges that do exist are of high quality, owing largely to the vast graphics and sound resources of the Astrocade console's electronics. One such cartridge is The Incredible Wizard, Astrocade's home version of the mildly successful Midway arcade game, The Wizard of Wor. I think it's interesting that he calls it mildly successful, and for many people it's considered, I think, kind of one of the greats of the golden age. Am I right?
I don't know, but like I said, I travel to other states to find it, so
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe it was a.
Like I said, I'm biased.
Okay. It says graphic detail is fine enough to see that your warriors are suited up in a helmeted spacesuit with a backpack. When he shoots, the kick of the rifle blast sets him back on his heels for half a second. And then he goes on and says a few more things, and finally he closes out with, in many respects, including Astrocade's rather nice hand controller, the Incredible Wizard is much more enjoyable than its arcade ancestor. Which I don't know if I agree with that, but that's not. I don't totally disagree with it either. So Here's one.
I agree with the hand control aspect of it, yes.
Oh, of course you do. Then we have a review by, this is from 1996. It was called The Incredible Wizard, a review by Joe Santulli. This is from a newsletter called Digital Press. It was number 28. Did you guys ever get any newsletters and things like that from like classic game systems in the 90s?
I don't think I ever signed up, but I'm sure I had that, whatever the pack-in was, right? Wasn't there a card at some point to get the Arcadian or something like that? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I was talking about
probably
later.
Should have.
I was talking about later, like when kind of there was a resurgence of classic gaming, I guess, back in the mid 90s, and before the internet really took off, like in say from like 91 to say 97, there were these people that would put out newsletters, and one of them was Digital Press, and he does a really good review. And one of our feedbacks mentions that I should probably read the whole thing, and I'm not going to read it here with you guys, but I actually sent a message to Joe Santulli today and asked him if he'd be okay with that. So I actually am going to read his whole review, but not now because it's pretty long.
Okay. Now, we talking the same Digital Press as the website?
Yes. Yeah.
And there's also the game store.
Yes, in New Jersey.
And I've been there.
Oh, have you really?
Yes, I have. I worked in Jersey for about 7 years, and I had to make the trip there.
Oh, awesome.
It was pretty cool.
It's called. Is it called Digital Press, the store too?
Digital Press Video Games.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, they have something called NAVA meetings there. Since you kind of live close by, you could kind of attend those. That's like their user group meetings for like anyone who collects classic video game systems from,
Yes, what does it say? It says NAVA is a monthly event bringing gamers of all ages together for competition, trade, and chatter.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if I was you, I mean, they've been having those I think since the 90s. So check in, go over there. I mean, how 2-3 hours away? Is that how far it would be for you?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
When I worked there, it was like half an hour.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, driving to Jersey is depending on when you go, can be like it could be 2 hours. It could be 5.
Oh.
It all depends on traffic and is the bridge shut down? Is this going on? I may have to make so if we're going to do something like that, I'll make a trip. I'll make a pilgrimage for the podcast.
Well, that would be cool.
There you go.
Yeah. Something else I've got here noted down is there's an article called Conquering the Incredible Wizard, and it's from December 1983, and it's from Video Gaming Illustrated. And I don't think I made anything that I want to read out of it, but basically it's how to play the game. I am going to sum up. It's 2 pretty tight, or 3 pages. One that has a really cool I think it's original to this article, unless it's from something else and they just use it here, but it's a really cool picture of something that might be The Incredible Wizard inspired. And then it goes on to tell you how to play the game, all these tips and things like that, which is where I got the tip on how to face each other back to back, actually. So that was not my own. I wasn't claiming it. Comment at the end here. The Incredible Wizard should sell a lot of Astrocade units. Not only is gameplay superb and the graphics excellent, the Wizard's death throws are dazzling. The sound effects are among the best of any home game. There is music which introduces each maze. If you don't appreciate the delay, cut the tune short by pressing the trigger, and the 6-shooter sounds of the wizard's weapon are worth the price of admission. That's how that one ends up. And, there's a really cool YouTube video. If you guys, I don't know if you've either have seen it, but it's by Nice and Games, and he does a review of The Incredible Wizard, and it's worth watching.
Cool.
And I think that is it, except for feedback. This one's from Chris, the former co-host. He says the projectiles of the player's characters and the monsters don't have limited ranges. They keep going until they hit the maze walls or a character. Projectiles pass through each other. They don't eliminate each other, as in, say, Space Invaders, which is a good thing to point out, and I'm glad he said that. Thank you, Chris. He says, when you kill a monster, his projectile disappears. The spooky chords heard before the player enters each dungeon are from Danger Ahead. This piece of music is from a 1946 movie called The Killers. The music was written by a Hungarian composer named Miklos Rosa. The piece was slightly rearranged by Walter Sherman for the Dragnet radio show and later the television series. He renamed it Bad 714 after Sergeant Friday's number. I guess Chris has one other thing to say, which we didn't touch on at all. He says the differences between the skill levels are significant enough to mention. However, I don't really know much about them because I only ever play on the medium level. You can play on easy, medium, and hard.
Easy, they don't shoot at you.
Oh, okay.
I don't think they shoot. I don't know if it happens later on, but yeah, you're not gonna. They don't fire, as far as I remember, at least from the start of the game.
Okay. Well, that's. And did you play hard?
Yeah.
That's we put it. That's as far as I'm gonna go, because it was. Did I play, or was it more I watched what happened as I was just basically killed? That was more of it.
Okay.
They're really fast.
Yes, they are.
When you play it on the hard level.
Back in August, Ian Berinsky, Ianoid, all right, who I think I might have met when I lived out in California. I think he might have attended one of the club meetings I went to for the Southern California Collectors Group. Let me know if that's right, Ian. He says, I really enjoy the podcast. Keep up the good work. If you are acquiring an Astrocade and 4 control handlers, you are probably planning to play the Incredible Wizard. It is easily the best known 4-player game for the system. One could argue whether it's the best. You can't actually play 4-player games, but maybe he's a little confused there. One could argue whether it's the best 4-player game available for any classic system, although War, or Warlords as some will call it, has it beat by popularity. Incredible Wizard showcases the system's capabilities as well as any game, with blaring sound and high-resolution graphics. This title is one of not to miss with friends. And I agree, Ian. Thanks for writing.
Yeah, I'd like to see a 4-player version, so if anyone wants to hack that up.
All that would happen was everyone would be out to kill each other. It would be out for blood.
Yeah, basically. There's actually... There's a game like that on Xbox One. It's a maze,
Wizard of Wor?
and it's all knights, and you basically have to kill each other to try to get like the golden chalice. But the whole time you're trying to kill each other. So I can imagine 4-player Wizard of Wor, Incredible Wizard. Yeah, we're just going to be killing each other, and the monsters will just sit back and watch.
Another feedback we got is from Alan Showalter. He says, my friend Chris Ambrose and I were big fans of the game. In fact, we are listed in the November 29th, 1983 edition of the Arcadian, Volume 6, Issue 1, Page 9, as the 2-player record holders with a combined score of 247,350. I'm guessing that was on the easy
Which difficulty was that on?
He says he's guessing it's on easy, but after 33 years, he doesn't recall. Needless to say, we had a lot more time on our hands in those days. Thanks, Alan. I appreciate that. We didn't talk about scores. When I played on medium just this week, I think I topped out in the low 2000s, which I actually didn't play it very much. I expected to play more, but did you guys keep track of your scores at all?
I didn't get to play too much today, but I think I got about 3,500. My friend got about 2,000.
Okay.
I do not feel that bad then. Hold on. Yes, I have it for you. All right, so 2-player, I got 4,020.
Okay.
Single player, 6,730, up to Dungeon 9.
Wow. Good for you.
And I'm rusty and old. So, that's pretty good, man.
We got an email from John. He says... He's asking, because I actually put out a call for some feedback on the Yahoo group, and he says, are you mainly looking for personal reflections on playing the game? Here are stream of conscious thoughts on the game. Please edit for clarity, which, by the way, I'm not doing right now, so if it needs to be edited, Chris, why don't you take care of that, please? I think he does a good job here anyway. The Incredible Wizard had some of the best sound effects for a game from that era and was a lot of fun to play. It was the game that got me into playing games, and while I was never really good at the game, I really liked the fact that this game had a radar to help track the monsters and played and felt like a real arcade game. The only other home version that came close was the Commodore 64 version. This game is really well suited for the Astrocade controllers. Incredible Wizard is one of the best games to play from the pre-1984 era of video games. I would rank it easily in my top 20 from that era. Oh, that's a really good thing to say. There's a lot of games that came out before 1984.
Honestly, I think it's a great game. I think, for a system that a lot of their games are arcade ports. Mm-hmm. I think if it had come out a little bit sooner and, the system wasn't... I don't know what the failure rates were back then either. That would have been interesting to actually find out. Not the original, like the library computers, that, didn't most of them go back to JSA?
Yeah, I think probably at least half.
Yeah, I think so.
let's say the system wasn't dying left and right, and people saw it as compared to the Atari.
Now, when you say
yeah.
dying, you mean overheating, or do you mean just like not selling very well?
No. The overheating issue.
Okay.
The other thing too is do you guys remember what was the original price on it? Does anybody know?
$329, I think, when it came out.
Okay, so I don't think I paid $329, but I'm thinking it was more like...
And this is in 1978, by the way. This is
right.
Yeah, by 82 it had gone down.
Okay, but I think it was still more than the Atari was. So I'm gonna throw something out. I think it was like maybe $249.
Okay.
Something like that. I could be completely wrong. So again, it was more money.
Okay.
So you're trying to convince mom and dad to spend $100 and something, which back then was pretty much unheard of for something that just plays games.
Yeah.
But like I said, me personally, I love this thing. I thought it was a great system, and that game that could have been the resurgence. Unfortunately, it wasn't.
Yeah.
But if people get a chance to play it and actually play it on real hardware, I think they'll be in for a treat, especially if you're into the classic systems of that time. So try to get yourself a working system if you can, and pick up a copy. Definitely.
You do bring up playing on real hardware versus emulation. As with most systems that play under emulation, you get this crisp, clear picture. It looks perfect. It's not fuzzy. And as with most systems, I think the games were designed to look a little fuzzy. So I think when I was playing this last night, and I was playing on my little 13-inch TV, sitting not too far away from it, and which is usually my game TV. I have a couple of TVs that I use for gaming, but that's my kind of go-to. I don't know why. And I'd been playing under emulation as well, and I was thinking it looked just better, even with RF. It was just, I wasn't using my S-Video hookup, and I think it just looks better.
Well, I got to be honest with you. S-Video, 42-inch Philips flat panel LCD, it looked real nice.
Brag.
While you develop science, we develop magic.
So I'm going to start by saying hi. This is Mike Di Salvo, and I have my son with me. Say hello.
Hello.
Tell the people your name.
I'm Michael Di Salvo.
Awesome. This is like our 25th take?
No. More than that.
More than that? Okay.
30th take?
30th take.
I think.
Okay. Yeah, you're probably right.
Or 29th.
So what we're doing is we're going to record us playing a game on the Astrocade for the upcoming podcast, right? Mm-hmm. What game are we playing?
The Incredible Wizard.
The Incredible Wizard. And what game system are we playing it on?
The Astrocade.
The Astrocade. So we're not playing it on the Xbox One. We're not playing it on the Wii U. We're not playing it on... Okay, that's pretty cool. So this is an actual Astrocade, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And where have you seen this before?
I have seen it downstairs on the shelf, and it got all dusty. But then we dusted it off, and then...
We dusted it off just so we could play this game today, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got the actual box and the actual manual to it, so you can see the artwork.
Yes, that's actually pretty cool.
Pretty cool, right? The only thing I couldn't find the actual cartridge. I have like a million of them, so we're actually going to play it on... We're playing it on real hardware. We're not playing it on a computer. We're not playing it on... It's not an emulation. It's not a ROM, but we are playing it on a multi-cart. Because I don't know what I did with the Incredible Wizard cart. We'll find it one of these days.
I remember you putting it in the Astrocade, but I don't remember... I remember you taking it out, but I don't remember where you put it.
Yeah, I don't know where it is. So we're going to play it on a multi-cart made by Ken Lill. I think that's his latest one. What do you think of the Astrocade, by the way?
I think it's pretty cool.
Compared to... Because you have some game systems, right? What game systems do you have again?
Wii U, 3DS.
3DS XL, right? XL. Okay. So compared to what you have, like there's no gamepad, right? There's no directional pad. These are the controllers, right? What do you think of this crazy thing, huh?
I think it's kind of hard to control because of how the big thing on the top, like the
knob?
Yeah, like the D-pad, it's kind of like...
It's not a D-pad.
I know.
These are actual... This is like the joystick, and the joystick is actually like internal, right? And then you only have one fire button, not 20. One. You have a trigger, and then you have the knob, the control knob at the top. But the other thing that's cool about the control knob
is it's also a paddle, or you can use it for like steering.
Like in scribbling, like it can change
scribbling,
colors.
right? Or in gunfights.
Yeah,
right. When you figured out how to actually aim and shoot me, like, and bounce it off the wall and kill me when I wasn't paying attention. Right. Okay. So the only thing we don't use that in Wizard. Wizard is just basically up, down, left, right, and just shoot. So why don't we start it up? So we're gonna choose number 1. Yeah, medium difficulty, right?
Because then like the monsters shoot you, but it's not too hard.
Right. They shoot you, which is just like in the arcade.
Yeah.
The arcade game, this is actually one of my favorites. It is actually a game called The Wizard of Wor. I don't have it, though, unfortunately. I would love to have it. Maybe someday. So this is as close as we're going to get for right now. So we're going to play with 2 people, right?
Yes.
Okay. So here we go, dude. Okay, so you don't have... Okay. You can actually stay in there for a while and hide out.
Yeah, but the only problem is that it will kick you out at one time.
So basically you're in like a dungeon, which is like a maze, and you got to shoot the guys. I forgot their names. I'm just going to call them blue guys right now.
Yeah, that's a pretty good name.
And down at the bottom you also have radar, so you can actually see where they are in the dungeon.
Like, some of them turn invisible.
And you got to be careful because we can also...
shoot each other.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. Yeah, like that guy. So now the yellow guy is running around.
The yellow guy?
They have weird name, and he just killed me. And now the red guy is running around. You gotta be careful, that dude's fast. Okay, now you gotta get that flying guy, the moth guy, whatever he is.
The moth guy, he gives you bonus points.
Right. So now we got all scores double. And remember, on the left and the right, you have a pass-through. So you can actually...
But only when the arrows...
Right.
...are in it. If...
It's probably like a warp.
Yeah, but if the arrows aren't in it, you'll lose a life.
No. You don't lose a life. You can't get through it. See?
Oh no, he went invisible.
Careful.
I think he's coming down my way.
Well, you can see him on the radar, so watch out. Don't let him get you. I got him.
Oh, gosh.
There's a red dude. I got him.
I am really low on health. I only have one more life after this.
Right. Yeah, there's no health. You have...
Oh!
And you just shot me.
I'm sorry.
No wizard yet.
Wizard. Extra player.
Pound it. Nice. So you gotta be careful because the maze... Look out! Did I just kill you?
Yep.
Sorry, dude.
Don't worry.
Wizard! Oh! I got him! Yeah! He's dead! Bonus. All scores quadruple.
Just wait until I get an extra life, then I'll be back.
Okay.
You just need to survive that long. And I don't think you will. No, it's because...
Thanks for the vote of confidence.
No, it's because there's so many guys. I'm kind of scared for you.
Me too.
There's a lot of yellows.
I know, they're trying to get me. I'm dead.
Game over.
Dead. So how did we do? So I got 4,020, and you got 230.
Because it's kind of hard.
I agree with you. All right, so we're going to play it again on medium.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember, we don't want to kill each other.
Oh, I'm right there. Don't kill me.
Yeah. You know what? How about you stay on your side, I'll stay on my side.
So I'll be on the left?
As like the strategy. No, you're on the right. Hold on, look out. He's going to try to get away. I got him.
No wizard. There's never the wizard on the first level.
What happened when we were going to each play on our own side?
No, seriously, I didn't even know that the arrow was right where I was.
So you got to be careful on this one, because...
The only thing about one player is that you can't shoot each other. That's the only good part. Oh!
I just sat there.
Game over.
Okay, so our final round, 1880 to 490. So what do you think? Is it fun to play?
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Would you have your friends over and play this? Or do you think your friends would be like, no, we want to play the Xbox One, we want to play something else?
I think maybe some of my friends, like Sebastian, actually kind of likes old games.
Okay.
Like you played arcade.
But when you say old game systems, what old game systems are we talking about?
Like,
are we talking like
more like arcade games, like real arcade games?
Okay, so you mean like the full-size arcade games?
Yeah.
All right, one of these days, I will try to track down Wizard of Wor as an arcade game for you to try it, because in the arcade it talks. Yeah, I have it on the Xbox 360. I have it on a compilation disc, but Adam had said it's glitchy, so that's the only reason why I didn't hook it up for us to play. But I'm glad you like playing this, and I appreciate you testing this game out. So now we have the perspective of an 8-year-old gamer. Mm-hmm. Right. Because when, guys like me are gone, you're going to have to carry on the legacy of keeping these 40-year-old games up and running.
Yeah, you have, like, in the basement, mostly, like, you also have a whole room full of game systems and games.
Right.
Then you have stuff on your wall. Like, all that's going to go to me. I'm going to be like...
Really? It's all going to go to you. What about your sister?
She's not really a gamer.
Wow. I clearly need to write a will because there's going to be some serious fighting going on. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Tim Duart, who used to publish the Atari 2600 Connection, sent some feedback to the show. He calls it Insights and Feedback on The Incredible Wizard and Wizard of Wor, the coin-op, or How to Play The Incredible Wizard and Wizard of Wor on the Cheap by Tim Duart. I've recently become extremely interested, he says, in the Bally Astrocade computer video game system. I've been listening to podcasts like Intellivisionaries for the Intellivision, and the ColecoVisions podcast for the ColecoVision, and the Select Game podcast for the Odyssey 2, which I've never even heard of that podcast, by the way. And then I discovered there was a podcast about the Bally Astrocade called the Astrocast. I also discovered that there was a community forum dedicated to the Bally Astrocade on AtariAge.com. I later discovered that the moderator of the forum was Adam Triunfo, an old friend I used to correspond with about video games via the U.S. mail over 20 years ago. This was the good old days before the internet. Adam and I go way back. We both published print newsletters about video games in the 1990s. Adam published Orphan Computers and Game Systems, a newsletter with about various consoles, and I published the Atari 2600 Connection, a newsletter with a sole focus on the Atari 2600 game system. We started corresponding again. This time it was electronically and not through the U.S. mail. We talked, he says in quotes, about the good old days of classic game systems, the games we enjoyed playing, our families, and more. Hard to believe it has been so many years. Time goes by fast. I've told Adam that I have wished to contribute in some form. I told him I was interested in the Bally Astrocade and its games. I've always rooted for those underdog systems like the Bally Astrocade and the Magnavox Odyssey 2. Some small problems. I didn't even own a Bally Astrocade, and I am a Bally Astrocade virgin. A few weeks later, Adam asked me if I would provide some feedback and my insights on The Incredible Wizard, which is the Bally Astrocade's home version of Wizard of Wor, for their Astrocast podcast, which spotlights this game cartridge. The February 1983 issue of Video Magazine has an article called Arcade Alley, the 4th Annual Arcade Awards. In the article, The Incredible Wizard gets the following praise, quote, "It is the finest cartridge ever produced for the Astrocade," end quote. That is high praise. More to come on this. I knew I had a daunting task that stood before me, finding a Bally Astrocade. Adam informed me that this would be a tough chore. The hardware is rare and pricey too. Sure, I could look on eBay and overpay. There are some systems out there for sale, but they are likely to be in need of repair, may not even work. I also learned through the podcast that many of the Bally Astrocade consoles were prone to overheating issues and problems. I would also need to find the Incredible Wizard on cartridge. I would plan on getting a complete in-box copy so I could get the full effect of what it was like to buy the game. Now, Tim, to butt in here, I want to say that The Incredible Wizard is actually one of the easiest to find games for the system. I think they made a lot of them, and it really shows because you can usually find it new in the box for just maybe $10-15. So if you see it for more than that, just pass it up. And you can usually find it in many of the collections. If they're selling a lot of cartridges, it's usually in one of those. To continue with Tim, with his email, or his article, sort of, kind of, I came up with an idea to solve these predicaments. Emulation. Again, Adam was a big help, and he pointed me in the right direction. The plan was to use MAME, a free program that is a multi-arcade machine emulator. MAME was easy to download and install on my Windows 10 laptop. Kudos to Adam once again for providing the necessary Astrocade system files and helping me in setting up correctly so that the Bally Astrocade is enabled, recognized, and configured as a system under the MAME emulation software. The unique Bally Astrocade controller would be a challenge. If I could find one, I discovered it would work with MAME under emulation on a computer, pending that I purchased a device called the Astro Adapter. I could not locate controllers locally, and I did not want to pay a small fortune for genuine Astrocade controllers on eBay. I wasn't going to be able to experience the unique controller with the small paddle on top. I settled for the next best thing that I knew I would be comfortable with under emulation, the standard Atari 2600 style joystick, that is, the CX40. Fortunately, I also own a USB Atari 2600 joystick that I use for the excellent Stella Atari 2600 emulator and the Odyssey 2 emulator. The beautiful thing is that MAME recognized it, so I was all set to enjoy some games. Well, almost. MAME was working fine, but something was missing. The Bally Astrocade files needed for MAME to emulate this system. I sent Adam a message, and he pointed me to his fine website, ballyalley.com. There's a section on emulation, and the first file in the list is the Bally Astrocade ROM collection. It's everything you need. As I listened to Adam and his co-host Chris discuss the game Sea Devil, I really wanted to check this game out. To my good fortune, Sea Devil was included in the ROM collection. Looking further down the list of games to choose from, I spotted The Incredible Wizard, which is essentially Wizard of Wor. I shared the news with Adam that I was excited to finally check out this game. I have great memories of my teenage years playing the arcade coin-op Wizard of Wor at the Brunswick Bowling Alley in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. I later enjoyed playing the game at home when I bought the Atari 2600 version, which is licensed by CBS. It was okay, and I thought it did a pretty good job at capturing the essence of the game. I later owned the Atari 8-bit version, which was licensed by Rockland, and played it on my Atari 800 XL computer. One day, a friend of mine in school, named Paul, who also was an Atari nut, handed me a box of about 10 5¼ floppy disks that were chock full with video games. Wizard of Wor was on one of these diskettes. I couldn't believe that some pirates found a way to illegally copy all of these games and that I was now the owner of them. There must have been over 100 games, and I didn't pay 1 cent for any of those games. I take that back. I did. I had to drive to Kmart to purchase a box of floppies so I could make a set of copies of these discs for myself before I had to give them back to Paul. I was pleasantly surprised and happy with this version of Wizard of Wor because the graphics were upgraded and I didn't see the flickering that was on the 2600 version. To be honest, I really didn't care about the flickering. I was happy because my friend Scott and I could play simultaneously without having to go to the Fairhaven Bowling Alley to play the coin-op version of the Wizard of Wor. Why wasn't the game released as Wizard of Wor? I have a theory, Tim says. When Bally wanted out of the video game business, they sold the system to a company called Astrocade. I am assuming that the way the new company handled the licensing of the game was to slightly change the name of the game. The Incredible Wizard is different enough, yet it is still similar enough so that a game player may know what it actually is. Yet the manual does state that it is licensed from Bally Midway Manufacturing Company and based on the original Wizard of Wor game done by Dave Nutting Associates, a Bally company. Why they could not use the name Wizard of Wor still remains a mystery. Perhaps we will find out if we can interview the programmers and or key people that were involved. And I agree with that. And whose job is it to interview these people? It's yours, Tim. Contact them, find them. No, it would be nice for me to start doing some interviews, I have to say. It is interesting to note that Astrocade also may have escaped an expensive licensing fee by also renaming their Galaxian clone as Galactic Invasion. Well, something interesting about that, Tim, you might not be aware, but when it was first released, it was released as Galaxian. So how is the Incredible Wizard in baseball terms? I think this game is a home run that gets knocked out of the park. Take my word for it, it is an excellent translation of the arcade coin-op. It is a game that really makes the Bally Astrocade shine. Part of my amazement in this game is the attention to detail that the programmer took in making this port of Wizard of Wor. In order to fully understand this, I felt the need to make some nose-to-nose comparisons of the arcade coin-op of Wizard of Wor and the home port of The Incredible Wizard. This would pose yet another problem for me. There were no arcades local to me that featured a coin-op version of the Wizard of Wor. I looked on eBay to see if any were being sold. Negative. Just parts. I bet a working coin-op machine is not cheap. Yeah, is there anyone out there who has a working coin-op of Wizard of Wor? I'd be interested to hear what you guys think of it, because I don't think I've ever played this in the arcade. So I mentioned last night when I was talking to Michael and Paul that I think I saw it maybe, but it might have been Berserk. I couldn't remember, and that was at a roller skating rink or a bowling alley, something like that. Tim turned to emulation once again to solve his problem. And he says, Adam came through for me again, this time sending me a zip file of the Wizard of Wor coin-op arcade machine's files needed for emulation under MAME. All I had to do was move the zip file into the ROM subfolder under the main MAME folder. Run MAME, choose Wizard of Wor, and voila! I'm playing the arcade coin-op of Wizard of Wor in all its glory. The look, the sounds, the feel, it almost all came back to me. I say almost because it felt like something was indeed missing. The screen looked right, my USB Atari joystick was working in MAME, and the sounds from them were playing. In the arcade Wizard of Wor, the eerie 4-note Danger Ahead tune from Dragnet, the ominous dum-dum-dum plays Shoot the Warlock, and you'll be treated to a double-score dungeon where point values are doubled. The 5th note of the Danger Ahead tune is played here. In the Bally Astrocade's Incredible Wizard version, it's always the 4 notes played on the Get Ready screen, then the 4th note is played on a Go screen. I never had noticed that, Tim, so that's a pretty good observation. But then it hit me, I remembered that the Wizard of Wor spoke in this game. After doing some research on the interwebs, I found the samples of the voice files needed for the Wizard of Wor. I downloaded them and moved the zip file into the samples subdirectory under the main MAME folder. I ran MAME again, and lo and behold, the Wizard of Wor was speaking. Technology can be amazing when things work. I found a listing of all the things that the Wizard of Wor can say while you are playing the game. And then he actually includes a list of 75 sayings. Some of them are pretty funny. Here are 10 sayings that I thought were worth mentioning. Another warrior for my babies to devour. How about if I don't use that voice again, huh?
Another warrior for my babies to devour.
Boer War, Gar War, and Thor War will do you in.
Boer War, Gar War, and Thor War will do you in.
Fear, I draw near each time I appear.
Warrior fear, I draw near each time I appear. Now
that little saying, that reminds me of something that's said in Sinistar. Another saying is, find me, the Wizard of Wor.
Find me, the Wizard of Wor.
One where the wizard is begging for money, he says, hey, insert coin.
Hey, insert coin.
Another one is, my beasts run wild in the warlord dungeons.
My beasts run wild in the warlord dungeons.
My magic is stronger than your weapons.
My magic is stronger than your weapons.
You'd better hope you don't find me.
You'd better hope you don't find me.
Your bones will lie in the dungeons of war.
Your bones will lie in the dungeons of war.
And finally, my favorite one, while you developed science, we developed magic.
While you developed science, we developed magic.
He says, a funny observation. My mind can only vaguely recall hearing the voice of the wizard at the Fairhaven bowling alley all those years ago. I think I remember that he spoke, but there was too much other noise there among us. The sounds of the competing nearby arcade machines, the chatter of people around us, and the crashing noise of a bowling ball hitting bowling pins made it all the harder to hear the wizard. It wasn't an important feature of the game for me. The voice of the wizard is only present on the coin-op. The voice of the wizard is absent in the Bally Astrocade version of the Incredible Wizard. It's a feature that really isn't necessary. Well, Tim, I think you're right, it isn't necessary, but it is a nice addition. There's no doubt in my mind that it couldn't have been included, at least not easily, on the Astrocade version, and so it kind of had to be. It kind of had to be missing, didn't it? The only version that I know of that had this version included was the Commodore 64 version on cartridge, where you can plug it into a voice synthesis module and actually have some of the voices. I can't remember how much, but not everything. Tim continues, on another note, there has been some mention on the Atari Age forums under the Odyssey 2 section about a port of Wizard of Wor for that system. It would be ideal because the hardware has voice capability. Nothing has materialized other than binary ROM of a game that just has a static playfield that does nothing. More promising is a discussion about a port for the Intellivision on the very active Atari Age Intellivision forum. That platform would also produce a fine version in my opinion. The Intellivision also has a voice module as well, so that could be utilized. Stay tuned. Both games mainly use the 3 primary colors for the sprites, red, blue, and yellow. Sure, black is a background. Other colors are used in the game and are cycled when you successfully shoot the wizard. When you shoot one of the monsters, they turn into a mess of red, blue, and yellow pixels. I think that's kind of cool. In other games, such as Space Invaders, the enemy just disappears. I like that effect. So I'm going to add something here that I don't actually think we talked about yesterday. The Wizard of Wor actually uses the same chipset as the Astrocade game, and it has the same limitations in the amount of colors you can have on the screen at once, which are just 4 colors. And the colors they choose in this are, if you can guess, red, blue, yellow, and black. So you can actually have 8 colors on the screen if you change the left and right color boundary, but I don't think they do that. But 4 colors works just fine for this game, and you kind of don't even notice the quote missing colors. There's no colors really missing because it has the same amount of colors as the arcade version, but the arcade has a higher resolution, so they kind of are able to give you more with less. But hey, you're playing a system that you bought for the home, not the arcade game. Tim adds that the arcade version with the Wizard of Wor has a pretty star-filled background. The Astrocade does not. I don't think this is really needed, he says. It's not a big drawback. And I agree. It really doesn't even kind of make sense because you're supposed to be in a dungeon. Why would there be stars visible in the dungeon anyway? Yeah, it kind of gives it a neat effect, but it kind of doesn't make any sense. I ran out of time to do a screen-by-screen comparison of the levels to discover if there are any differences in the mazes. Check out Adam's screenshots of the 20 different mazes of the Incredible Wizard. And then he gives a link to Atari Age, which has a whole bunch of screenshots that I took back in the spring or so. He says that there's the 20 different mazes. Those are the 20 mazes that I came across. I don't actually know how many mazes are in the Incredible Wizard. I talk about that they come in a random order, and you can start off in a different maze on every game. So I think when I posted all the pictures that I didn't quite make that clear. Tim continues, I wanted to play in 2-player mode again. I obtained a second inexpensive but brand new RetroLink USB joystick controller for $9 on eBay. It was brand new and it did the job. Both the Incredible Wizard and the Wizard of Wor coin-op running under MAME recognized the second joystick and allowed simultaneous 2-player action. Yes! Now I needed to find another player. I recruited my 11-year-old son Christopher and introduced him to the Bally Astrocade. He didn't know it was running under emulation. He just thought it was another computer game. I gave him some basic instructions. Shoot the monsters. I'm the blue warrior and you're the yellow warrior. We can work together or we can play against each other. Adam told me I would learn a lot about my son when you play this game. He shot and killed me as soon as he had the chance. He did not want to work together. He wasn't really as impressed with the magic of this game as his father was. But that's okay. Everyone has different tastes. We played for a while. I think I can get him to play it again with me. We also played Shark on the Intellivision together in the past. I think he prefers talking on his headset with his friends, playing Survive the Ark on his Xbox One. Someday he will appreciate the classics. I hope. You can learn a lot about your friends and family with this type of game. Give it a try. I'm going to interject here and say when my son was growing up, my son is now in his early 20s, he started playing 2600 games when he was, well, very, 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 very young. I mean, he grew up with all these old systems, and his favorite game system, even when he had the Nintendo 64 and all that, his favorite game system was the Atari 2600, and it was because I had like 300 cartridges or something for it, and I would just set them all out, and he would just plug in a game, play it for 5 minutes, if that long. He had a short attention span, and then he would put in another cartridge, and I think he was not even 2 years old, and he was playing that Atari 2600 quite a bit. And then he moved on to the Amiga, and people used to get really surprised because I would make him boot discs and he could just play with the games he wanted to play. And yeah, if it wasn't for all these video games, especially Zelda, I don't think he would have learned to read as early as he did, because his mother decided that the best way to make him learn to read was for him to learn how to play these video games for himself, and not have us read the game facts for him. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject, but it's interesting that young kids, when they encounter these old video games, if they've never seen them before, they kind of get turned off by the graphics. When if they give them a chance, sometimes they really do enjoy them. All right, you've probably heard enough from me. Let me continue with Tim's feedback. He says, oh, one other note about MAME and the Wizard of Wor arcade coin-op. You need to press 5 for a 1-player game at the beginning of the insert coin screen, and or you need to press 6 for a 2-player game at the beginning insert coin screen. If you pick a 1-player game in the Wizard of Wor arcade coin-op, the computer will control the second player warrior, which, by the way, does not happen under the Astrocade version of the game. In The Incredible Wizard, you can also choose 2 players even if you do not have another player. He will get pushed into the dungeon and will basically be a sitting duck for the other monsters or yourself to kill. If you choose a 1-player game, the second player warrior is absent from the game. So if you're going to be playing solo, you may as well choose 2 at the number of players screen and go in and kill that sitting duck right away and take advantage of the score for those easy points. I had a lot of fun with the MAME emulator in the Astrocade version of The Incredible Wizard, Tim says. I mean, I have become a huge fan of this game. I can't get over how good it is. In my notes, I told Adam that it was becoming my favorite game of all my systems. Adam told me, quote, "That's quite an impressive thing to say. The Astrocade version is really good, and it's neat to see someone like you, Tim, experience it for the first time and feel the same way as most people felt picking it up in 1982. I never owned an Astrocade until the 1990s, but it impressed the hell out of me back then, and it still does now," end quote. The Incredible Wizard has its own charm, and I was not able to try it out on real hardware. The experience of playing the Wizard of Wor arcade coin-op was also great, but it is not the same experience as playing the game in a bowling alley, inserting an actual quarter or token into the machine, and hearing the other surrounding sounds. It's hard to describe, but the experience was very exciting with both games under MAME. So there you have it. The neat aspect to me is that I was able to play and critique both games, The Incredible Wizard for the Bally Astrocade and the Wizard of Wor arcade coin-op, in the comfort of my own home, without spending a dime, or should I say a quarter, ha ha ha. Well, I did have to buy a second USB joystick, but that's about all. Do I want to get a Bally Astrocade now? Sure, if the price is right. I will check out the other games that this sleeper of a system has. Emulation is nice and I recommend it, but if possible, I'd like to have the real thing. One other mystery. I have always believed that The Incredible Wizard was programmed by an individual named Bob Ogden. The instruction manual states it was created by Tom McHugh, Scott Norris, and Julie Mullen, with creative consultation and in conjunction with Action Graphics Incorporated. And he asks, could this be Bob Ogden's company? Well, Tim, I can answer part of your question. Mostly it's a mystery to me, too. I always thought that Bob Ogden wrote this game, too. The instruction manual says otherwise. So if someone can point me to the truth of the matter and get it straight in my head, I'd like to know. If anyone knows how to contact Bob Ogden, I actually want to interview him anyway, because he did program some other games for the system, and it'd be great to start doing some interviews and get the ball rolling in that direction and find out some background that we don't know otherwise about the system. Tim, I really, really appreciate that feedback. It was really well thought out and much longer than I expected, but in a good way. In a good way. It's not every day that someone writes feedback that is really an article, and if you'd be willing, maybe we can figure out how to put it on Bally Alley and maybe put it with some additional graphics and have this little feedback have its own little webpage. If anyone else has any feedback, you can be sure to send it along to us, and we'll feature it in an upcoming episode of the podcast. I appreciate finally getting some feedback from some people that we can share. It's nice to hear that people like the podcast. If anyone has anything they want to add to what we've talked about in the podcast so far about The Incredible Wizard, or if they have some comments about them, or hints, or anything about how to play the game best, or memories of when they played it growing up, let us know, and I'll include it, like I said, in an upcoming episode. Again, thanks again to everyone who sent in some feedback, and keep it up, guys. Thanks. Rather than jump right into talking about the Arcadian and stuff, have you been doing anything game-related or classic game-related recently?
Well, I guess the big thing would be the Wavemakers archiving. So yeah, I just had finally finished going through all the 300 baud Wavemakers programs that I've had recorded, and got everything digitally processed and compared all the alternate versions. So that showed some had some good results as far as finding alternates of things. I'm sure everyone has been eagerly awaiting a version of Wavemaker's Fortune Teller in 300 baud format that doesn't crash when it gives you a fortune.
I've been waiting for a long time. That's actually one of the few programs by Wavemakers that was printed in the Astro Basic manual, huh? Wasn't?
I forgot that. But
yeah, I think here I actually have the Astro Basic manual right in front of me. Coincidentally, well, not coincidentally, it's pretty much always in front of me because I always keep it on my desk in case I need it for reference. I don't see it in here. I thought it was in here. Anyway, I thought it was in there. So I do appreciate that. I was looking through them for the last couple days, sorting through, adding some notes. I see that there were, I think you archived 23 different programs, I think, something like that. And in each of those programs, some of them only have one version, but some of them had quite a few variants, as you were suggesting or saying.
Yeah, Wavemakers was a pretty popular company, so there was definitely some programs that several people had, and sometimes they had to, I guess they modified their, Mike Peace modified the program sometimes.
Yeah, there's definitely differences between the Bally Basic versions and the Astro Basic versions. For not a lot, but most of the programs, even if they're just to change the things that like make the sound work correctly under Astro Basic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to explain for some of our listeners what exactly you're doing when you are archiving programs? How does that work? In particular, I guess since we're talking about Bally Basic programs.
Well, the first step, of course, is to just get a digital recording of the tape. So, I've got a tape deck and run a cable into my sound card and just play it and record it in Audacity. And then once you've got that, sometimes it helps to filter the recording. Like you're going to apply a high-pass filter to try to get a little bit of kind of the wobble out of the waveform.
Yeah, you've told me that in the past, and there have been programs I couldn't otherwise archive without doing that, so it works really good using that high-pass filter.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it actually makes it worse, but other times it's just like magic, and, programs that just had tons of errors just look pristine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's various programs that you can use to actually kind of get out the digital data. So
you mean so like you can have a printout of the program? Well, sort of a printout, a listing?
Well, I was thinking to get it to a binary file,
I see.
like what we call it. Usually we use the PRG.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If MAME ever supported loading programs, I guess those would be the versions that it would load, right? The PRG programs?
You would probably use a WAV file, because that's kind of more a representation of what you actually load into the system.
Oh, okay. Because I'm trying to think if I've ever loaded tapes onto other systems. I guess I have on the Atari 8-bit emulation under a program called, or an emulator called Altera, but I think they're in like a binary format, if I recall. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. But
yeah, that is possible, but with the 300 baud programs, it actually is kind of sending it in one byte at a time. It's not just like a memory dump like the 2000 baud is.
Oh, that is very true. Yeah, they work completely differently for those who aren't aware. Something that's worth mentioning is sometimes a tape that's at 300 baud, at least in my experience, I've been able to get stuff to load from tape, that even if they're pretty old, if they're in 300 baud format, but never, ever if they're in 2000 baud format. They have to be digitally cleaned. Have you run across that?
Yeah, I think that's often the case.
Yeah.
It's probably a little more reliable, which I guess makes sense, is if you have more time to store the same amount of data in 300 baud.
Yeah, it's a little more robust too. So, well, yeah, I do appreciate you doing that. Those will be going up soon. I actually took some videos today of a couple of the programs loading, some of the programs that we'll be talking about in the Arcadian, and I uploaded them to YouTube today, so they'll actually be in the show notes. Yeah,
there's kind of two different programs you can use to get the binary data. There's a KCS, and then there's also the Casio utilities, called that because they were originally made for some Casio computers, but to use the same data format, the Kansas City standard.
Right.
And then if you have the binary file, then there's a couple of programs originally by Ronaldo that will get you from the binary file to a text file. Yeah. And then you can actually, read the basic code, which is really handy, and edit it as well. And you can actually make changes and then go back to a binary file. And then the KCS program also has the functionality to take the binary file and regenerate a WAV file. But in the then that time this WAV file won't have any errors and will compress really well.
Yeah, it compressed. Yeah, I think all the programs you sent me, there were at least 40 or 50 WAV files that you sent me, and they compressed to less than 2 megabytes. So, and before they used to take up hundreds of megabytes, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, saves a lot of space on your hard drive for sure.
Yeah, when I first started Bally Alley, the 300 baud area used to take a long time for people to download stuff if they did, but now it wouldn't make too much of a difference since everything's so much faster. But if you were dialing in back in 2000, I don't even think, when did I start uploading those 300 baud programs? It wasn't that long ago. Actually, I take that back. But anyway.
Yeah, there were a few at the beginning, but
yeah, not
I think we definitely expanded that a lot.
Yeah. It wasn't until you started helping me out in like 2005 that the program started really becoming archived, which is great. So thank you, of course.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Something that's also neat about when you archive these 300 baud programs is you can look at the listings, and like you said, you can change them. But also you can just type in a listing into a text file and use these 300 baud programs and create a WAV file that loads up into our real Astrocade. I went to the library yesterday and I picked up a book on some arcades. This one's called Coin Operated Americans, which is a really odd title. It's but I haven't started reading it yet. I look forward to that. I'm kind of into that, especially since I've been playing some arcade games for the first time, like in the arcade, in quite a few years. So it's pretty fun. Speaking of arcade games, the High Score Club game this month is actually an arcade game. Have you had a chance to play The Adventures of Robbie Rhoda?
Well, I played it a few years ago, but I haven't tried it yet for the contest.
Well, that's okay. If the less people that play, the more chance I have of winning, so... All right, so I guess I'll announce which we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering the Arcadian issue, Volume 1, issue 7, and that's going to be the June 1979 issue, and we're going to be covering the Arcadian Volume 1, number 8, Volume 8, July 1979 issue. So why don't we dig right in? Have you had a chance to read these over pretty closely or make any notes?
Yeah, I read through them and made a few notes.
Cool. I'll let you get started since I usually talk too much.
So, Volume 1, Issue 7. So, first thing I mentioned was Bob Fabris was saying that he's going to be sending copies of the programs to authors for proofreading now, which is probably a good idea in light of all the errors they've talked about the last couple of issues. Yeah,
and which continue to be talked about in future issues.
Yeah, it didn't fix it, but every bit helps, I suppose.
Yeah, and we mentioned in the last episode that a lot of these programs are handwritten, so I don't know what he must have done. Did he ever? He still wasn't able to print yet, I don't think. So I wonder how he was able to copy or ask them for help, or I wonder how he did that.
I was assuming that just he would type them up or make a whatever format he was going to put into the newsletter. He'd basically mail them a copy and have them read over it.
Oh, okay.
That's at least what I'm imagining.
Yeah.
And then, I guess they could call if they noticed an error.
It'd be pretty hard to do that, though, because you'd have, I don't know, what would they do? If they let's say he typed up the listing and sent it to them, like, in the way it was going to be printed, would they have to compare it line for line by looking at the screen? I mean, that's pretty crazy. If I was an author, that would be the most challenging part, would be to, like, after it's already sent off and looking it over that way. It's pretty amazing that there was stuff printed like this and it worked in the first place. So, yeah.
I've got a little bit of information about some projects for a keyboard and printer. So we'll probably get into more details on those later.
Yeah.
But, you do kind of see the early efforts to make the system a little more like a actual computer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess I can touch on that here. I wrote the keyboard project is in progress to connect a 63 key unencoded QWERTY keyboard to the Bally Arcade. This keyboard would be wired in parallel to the already present 24 key keypad, and the keyboard sells for $29.95 from James Electronics. Which brings up a point here, because just this past week, I think it was Ken Lill or 2 weeks ago, Ken Lill on the Yahoo group was mentioning that he was wondering if anyone was interested in a kit that would have a keyboard that would work similarly to this.
Well, we can start to get into some of the programs they printed. We have Bang Man by Ernie Sams.
Yeah.
So that's... Yeah, I think that was one of the more popular early programs. I think, it was on like some of the compilations, like the Best of the Arcadian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so basically,
I loaded that one up today, and that was one of the videos I made, and it's actually got a really good way of hiding from the user. You have to kind of type blind, but like if you don't have to hide your eyes or avert your eyes from the screen when the other person's typing in the word, Well,
yeah.
I guess we need to describe what this program is. Bang Man is a Hangman clone, sort of.
Yeah, and the catch is that instead of being hung, it's much more modern and you're shot.
Right. Yeah, it's a. I guess all they did decide to do was change the H, change the H to a B, and they came up with this incredibly violent game.
Yeah.
There must have been people in the streets. Let's see if I wrote anything here. It has two novel features. Letters being entered are hidden from view from the opposing player, and the penalty for losing is not hanging. Which this is from what Bob says. One person keys in a word up to 10 letters. Another tries to guess it with no more than 9 guesses using the knob and the trigger, which is pretty ideal. So they don't have to. The person keying in the word, they have to key it in on the 24 key keypad, but the person trying to guess it, they just hold hand controller number 1 and turn the knob until it selects letters A through Z, and make their selection. And if they get it right, you hear I don't remember if you hear a tune or not. I didn't actually get any right today. Oh. I just got shot. Let's see, before we get on to some...
I noticed that program actually had some pretty extensive documentation.
Yeah, especially for the Arcadian, which sometimes doesn't show anything. So, let's see. Yeah, what did I write about that? Ernie Sams provided in-depth documentation on how the program works. Normally, the Arcadian didn't print extras like this, even if the author did include it with his program. It's a nice bonus to see this available for the game. Yeah, that brings up, I guess you and I both know this, but most people who've looked through the Arcadian, a lot of authors did include documentation for their programs with their programs, but it just wasn't printed in the newsletter. I guess for space reasons, I guess. But that's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could see if you end up getting a bunch of submissions, maybe you just want to put in more programs.
Yeah.
But there was some people put in quite a bit of effort into making instructions or details on how the program worked.
Yeah. Frustration Fortress, I think that's the most detailed one I can think of off the top of my head, I think. The next up we have a random art modification by Dave Stalker. He changes 4 lines in the program from last month, and now there's some shape changes in the program, and now the program also has some sound effects. Do you want me to cover the tutorials since I wrote, or do you want to cover those?
If you wrote something up again about it, then go ahead.
Yeah. There's 2 tutorials by Steve Walters and Dave Ibach, which is actually misspelled here as Dave Ibach. And I'm not sure if they worked on these tutorials together. It's not really clear, or if they wrote them separately. Do you know?
Well, I guess I assumed they worked on them together, because I know they did some programs together as general video.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, good point. The first tutorial is called Character Size and Print Location. The 5x7 letters have 1 pixel edge around each of them, which effectively makes them 6x8. The cursor is a solid black 6x8 block and the size of a full character. 11 lines with up to 26 characters can fit in the screen. There are some inconsistencies with how the characters can be placed anywhere in the screen using the CX and CY variables. Several examples are given on how to outline text, and boxes are given. So it's how the first tutorial. The second one is on if statements, which isn't too exciting, but this is a follow-up on last month's tutorial that was also on if statements. In this one, the if statements work is explained in more detail. 9 different methods of saving a few bytes are explained using different conditions of if statements. Most of these methods use parentheses. And there's actually another tutorial. You want to cover that one, or do you have any notes on that one?
Yeah, I don't think I wrote anything about that one, so if you want to go.
It's just a very short one. It's a follow-up by Gene, I'm going to pronounce it Telefer, and he explains how to use the ABS. He used the less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, reverse sign, and absolute with if statements. I'm not sure why he has to go into such detail, but he does. All right. And so Bob has been encouraging people to write tutorials for the newsletter, and he's finally getting them. So it's taken a few issues, but it seems to be coming up. He's got some more too. So on page 53, Bob mentions that there's a dealer in St. Louis called RTS Electronics Gametronics, and he's holding football tournaments on Tuesdays from 6 to 9 and on Saturdays from noon to 4. And when I say football here, I'm talking about the cartridge football, not like people over there I'm playing football. So players should bring their own controllers. And I made a note here that this is years before Super Smash Brothers tournaments. So, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that sounded pretty fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I bet there probably weren't a whole lot of Astrocade tournaments.
Yeah, I agree.
If you were in St. Louis, you could do it.
Right. Yeah, it does remind me of a story. I think I mentioned it once before, but Richard Hauser had told me that when he was at some meeting in, I guess, California, that they played football and one team lost, and the next year they played again, and the other team lost, and it's because they changed the cartridge and made it so the other team could never catch the ball. So that was pretty funny. Also, on the same page, we've got ABC Hobbycraft in Evansville, Indiana, are now open on Sundays and act as a local hangout for Bally enthusiasts. And one of the letters we'll be covering is actually by someone who worked there. So.
Yeah, so a little interesting tidbit. I looked them up, and that store is actually still open.
ABC Hobbycraft? Yeah,
in Evansville, Indiana.
Really? Well, I'm going to have to go over there and buy myself a new Astrocade.
Yeah, they've got a website. All they really advertise was like model trains and cars and such.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I'm going to note that down so I can look at it. Look at website, because maybe I'll put a link in the show notes. Who knows? Okay, I wonder if anyone who works there from back then. Huh. Probably not, but that was a long time ago. But for like a not a national chain to still be in business after all these years, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I know there's someone in the user group who worked there, isn't there? Is that Guy, or is it someone else?
It is Guy, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, he's maybe I should try to. I haven't interviewed anybody because I sort of have got this fright of it for some reason, but I should get past it because it's pretty easy to chat with you. So I imagine it'll probably be pretty easy to chat with pretty much anyone, I guess. Yeah. So next up, we've got Pinball model 2007 and Space Invaders modeled part number 2006. They're scheduled for release coming up in July. So up until this time, there haven't been too many cartridges out, and the ones that have come out have been pretty delayed. And Space Invaders is actually one of my favorite games for the system. It's pretty hard, but it works pretty well. Shows off a lot more colors on the screen, and it's fun to play. And what more can you ask for? Bob talks here. He says, the original intent of the newsletter was to be bi-monthly, but material has been arriving much faster than he expected, and so the newsletter has been coming out nearly monthly. And it's becoming difficult, so he's going to get a professional help in the folding and stapling area. Though the newsletter publication frequency has increased, the subscriber price will not change, which I think is pretty cool. That brings me to page 54, which is just the back page. Do you have anything to add before we get there?
Yeah, that request reminded me of the story Bob mentioned about finding someone to, help him with like putting together the issues and mailing them out. And So the way I understood it, basically their only wage was they got a free subscription, so it didn't sound like a very good deal to me.
Yeah, it was only $10 to get it, so... But most of these people did it for nothing, so getting a free subscription, I guess, wouldn't be too bad, you know.
But yeah, definitely good that he was getting enough material that he could publish more than bi-monthly.
Yeah. It's, I guess, maybe it's in the next issue he talks about, or one of the letters he mentions that at this point in time he's got about 600 subscribers, which is quite a bit for... Yeah. I mean, there's really no way to find out about the newsletter yet, so... not easily, anyway. I guess maybe if you wrote to Bally or something, they would have sent you his way, but that was it.
Yeah, and I guess some of the dealers were mentioning it, like, you know, I know, like Guy McLemore at ABC Hobbycraft had mentioned that. Yeah,
that is true. So on the back, we've got some ads. These are classified ads. I'm going to go over a couple of them. There's someone who's selling their Bally Arcade with 2 games, basic and 4 controllers for $260. He doesn't say if it's working. Guy McLemore is selling several programs for use with role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons. We kind of talked about that before, but I wanted to bring it up again because in the letter we're going to talk about, he mentions something that's going on with him talking about with some kind of group. I don't think it ever came together, but there were some kind of, it seems like a fantasy role-playing group or something like that. So I thought that was interesting. And all of his things can be... all of his programs can be downloaded if you're playing the first edition of D&D, and they're called the Fantasy Game Package. John Collins, the guy who wrote Checkers, I think that was that last month or is that this month? I think that was last month. He wrote a bowling game, which is also available for download. W&W Software Sales has been reorganized. They now have 4 tapes with 5 programs on each of them. Most, maybe even all of these programs have been archived in 300 baud format, but only a few of them have been archived in Astro Basic format. And they might not even be compatible. There might be quite a few differences between them. I don't know.
Yeah, so I noticed that W&W Software was expanding their library pretty rapidly. Like here they've got 4 cassettes, and I think the very next issue they say they've got 5 cassettes, and you know those had 5 programs each on them.
Yeah. Let's see. In fact, discussing these, let's see, here we go. Never mind, that must be from the next one. I was going to mention something about, I thought Bob says when he, where these programs are coming from, but that must be from the classified ad on the last page of the next issue, so we'll skip what I was about to say. The programming keyboard, the latest delay is due to Texas Instruments petition now before the FCC. An excerpt from the May 1979 issue of Consumer Electronic Monthly reads, doubt about future standards for personal computers will delay product introductions, as well as halting units produced and not yet in production. Bally, for one, will hold off manufacturing its upgraded game computer introduced at Winter CES until a decision is reached. Quote, we have 2 units to go with, end quote, says National Sales Manager Jack Nyman. He continues, the one we showed at CES for around $650 and a lower price unit for around $350. But it could cost us millions of dollars if we make a decision on which unit to go with before the FCC makes a final decision. So obviously they just never did it. So
yeah. I mean, at least the way they're presenting it there, it sounds like if not for that FCC delay, it would have actually came out.
Yeah, so, it does sound like that. Yeah. I mean, it might have been an excuse, but
I mean, it's hard to say, but yeah, it seems like there's so many times that expansion almost came out.
Yeah. Yep. And having read like recently some stuff about the Z-Grass and stuff, I really wish that was available just to check out and play around with, but it's too bad that the language isn't available. So. The one final thing for this issue that I have noted down is that Bob's discussions with Bally indicate that this delay will cause them to put off a decision until around January 1980, which is 6 months from when this issue was written, by the way. Delivery of units would be later than that. Bob is disappointed, but says that, quote, some people are working on ways to make their own. Subscribers are working on keyboards, memory additions, and other goodies. And what's interesting about that is all that did come out, so pretty neat stuff. Is there anything else in this issue you wanted to bring up before we continue on to the July issue?
Looks like that's everything.
So The next issue up, we have the July 20th, 1979 issue. This one is 14 pages long, which is what I think the last one was only 8 pages, so it almost doubled in size.
Yeah.
Although it's most of the time they average around, 10 pages or so, something like that.
So we get started with some more talk about the programmable keyboard. So, Bob's really working to encourage collaboration on some sort of simple RAM expansion. So he's asking for some feedback about what price and capabilities people would be interested in.
Yep.
So, do you have any more details you wanted to go into on that?
Basically, he was just wondering if $650 for the add-under is too much, or do you think, or do subscribers think $350 is better? And what would they be willing to pay for a 16K RAM expansion that has a ROM-based RAM, like something similar to ZGrass in it? And he asked people to reply in, I think, postcards or something like that. And when I was going through the Bob Faber's collection looking for letters to talk about this issue, I remember scanning them in, but there's people, dozens and dozens of people replied on these postcards, and they just basically say what they thought. So maybe in the next episode of the podcast, I might go through a couple of them and see what the general consensus is. Although I think he might print it in the next issue too. I can't quite remember, but it's interesting that I have those. I don't know what good they're doing me, but
yeah,
it's
it'd be interesting to see how many people responded.
Yeah. So next up, Greg reports that you can save a few bytes by input doubling, which I don't really know what that meant, but it says you can include up to 36 variables separated by commas for each input statement. So people were trying to look for ways to save bytes everywhere they could.
Yeah, I think it just means instead of saying input A, input B, you say input A, comma B.
Oh, okay. Oh, so then you it would if you ask someone for a number, they would have to know that they have to do all those at once, though, wouldn't they? Otherwise, they'd get an error statement, right? If they didn't know they had to input 3.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd have to test it to make sure.
Yeah.
I think you'd put 1 go, 2 go, and then it wouldn't go to the next part until you'd entered all of them.
Okay. And for those listeners that don't know what go means, that's basically the enter statement or return key on the Bally. They call it go for some reason, which is a little odd to me, but I'm used to it. But it still is unusual.
Yeah.
Bob is he's trying to control external equipment from his Bally arcade. He's working on a scheme to use specific tone frequencies to control devices. He hasn't met with success yet, but he is working with 3 subscribers on the project. He goes into some detail, including recommendations for electronic books that have some helpful information. And I don't recall him talking about this too much more in the future, but that's an interesting way to come up with a way to control something from your computer, have a tone being played. So if you wanted to turn off the lights, maybe, beep, and then the lights would turn off. It sounds like the clapper, but used before the clapper.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in a little bit they go into detail about how you could actually dial a phone from the system.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's the only thing I remember like that actually being functional.
Yeah, that was that's actually in this issue, I think, right? Yeah. The print statement can be used to display the truth of a statement, which this can be useful when combining it with an if tutorial from the last issue. That just basically means if you put print 1 + 1, well, that would give you the answer, so that's not quite right. If you were to print, they use the example here, print 1 = 2, and that's going to display 0 because it's not true. And they say you can use those for if statements. And I think it's meant to save some, if you can believe it, a couple of bytes here or there. Yeah. What else we got here?
So they've got this really big tutorial that's basically just rudimentary introduction to the idea of computer programming.
Yeah.
So, it's probably... If you're already familiar with computer programming, it's pretty dull to read, but, if it's your first time ever trying anything, I could imagine that being useful. Yeah,
it's actually 3 pages. It's pretty long for something printed in the Arcadian, which is probably why this one is 14 pages altogether. Does it say who wrote this one? I don't see it here. I have a couple notes I wrote about it. The tutorial is called simply Tutorial Number 1, Beginning Programming and Computer Usage. This is a very basic overview of how computers works and how a user can interact with it using BASIC. Very simple basic programs are included. A half page of explanation is given to a 6-line for next loop, which I think is, I guess it's not unusual. I guess if you really have never touched a computer and you bought this system to play, Space Invaders or something, and you happen to get BASIC, then you wouldn't know anything about this kind of stuff. This tutorial is for the absolute beginner. That's my own personal note. I don't find it interesting, but someone who bought their Bally to play cartridges, like I said, would probably find it pretty interesting. Maybe even intimidating. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this was a lot of people's introduction to programming.
Yeah. I mean, by this time, if people had a computer already, they probably wouldn't have gone. It would have been kind of like taking a step backwards getting the Bally Arcade. So this probably, if they had an arcade, the Bally Arcade, that is, this was introduction that was, I guess, worth. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. I'm just going to skip the rest of that thought.
Okay.
So I'm up to page 58 now, which is, okay. I was going to talk about Amazing Space here. It's not actually said who wrote it, but from the notes that I have in the Arcadian in the collection, I don't know if this is the person's last name or first name or what, but it's Aquila, Aquila, and Richard Hauser fixed the program up. Did I already say I'm talking about Amazing Space?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, so was that the first Maze program they'd printed?
I don't know if it's the first one. It's the first one that comes to mind. Yeah, it's described as a rocket ship through the Maze challenge. I haven't tried this one recently. I remember playing it years ago, and I'm probably going to make a video of it since I think I'm going to start doing that. They're not great videos, but they give you an idea of what these programs look like, at least, because you can't play them under emulation, and so most people can't probably see what they look like otherwise. But I think this program, if it's the one I'm recalling, actually there's something with the left-right color boundary to give it some extra colors on the screen, which is always a nice plus for Bally basic programs. Chuck Tomka, who's got some tutorials coming up in this issue, is selling some programming graphic grid sheets. He sells them for $1. You get 20 sheets. And there's an example of what they look like in the Arcadian. And these haven't been archived, but ones that work exactly the same way are archived on BallyAlley.com. Visual and oral special effects are requested from users. It looks like Bob wants to start a subroutine library of useful routines for programmers. I don't think that happened, did it?
I don't remember those, at least.
Yeah. Color values have been provided by Don Wurst. He used a Tektronix 520A vector scope to get the standard TV color values that can be used for a color bar generator. Bob requested this information in the last issue, so it got provided. And when I wrote this, it didn't really stand out to me, but in the last few days since I've been uploading some videos, and there's been some talk about like my Astrocade might be giving too much of a strong signal to my TV, and someone suggested I get a vector scope because they're so inexpensive now because they're not used anymore, or NTSC ones aren't used anymore, I guess. But that's not something I'm really probably going to do, but I thought it was interesting that you can get. He pointed me to one that was like $35, and then you can look at your video signal and figure out if it's in spec, I guess. I don't really. Do you know anything about those?
Yeah, no, I've never tried using one.
Yeah. I used to work at a television station, working with computers there, and I remember at the time NTSC was still being used, and they had a vector scope there, and I remember it was always on, and there was always someone who had to keep an eye on it to make sure like something wasn't going wrong with the equipment, because otherwise they were sending out signals that some TVs wouldn't show correctly or something like that. But it wasn't something that I ever saw an issue with there. So. On the next page, on page 59, we have a slot machine by Ernie Sams. And this was actually written in April of '79. The full program and the line documentation are included. And
so, again, they have quite a bit of documentation in this issue.
Yeah, this is this one for documentation. They like it'll. I'm going to give an example, but not read it all. But he'll like list line numbers like 10 through 96, instructions for setting up slot machine, and then he'll say more program lines, and then say what they do. So basically it's a breakdown. If you wanted to understand how the program worked, that would be a way to figure it out.
Yeah. So there were so many slot machine programs made for Astrocade.
Yeah, I just actually loaded up this program about an hour and a half ago just to try it out, and I made a video of that and posted it a little while ago. And the first one I loaded up from the archive didn't work, and I realized as printed in the Arcadian, it won't work because it uses up every single byte. And in the Arcadian, when it's printed, it's got the and as it's archived too, because there's an archived version that you did this way, digitally archived. That and I'm glad you did, because it's interesting to see the differences. There's not rems, but there's remarks. Like the first few lines are remarks, and if you include those in the program won't run because you run out of RAM. And so when it loaded for me, I was making a video, and the program ended with "sorry," or when it finished loading, and then it ran because I totaled it to, and because I loaded it with colon input semicolon run, but as soon as I tried to, I take that back. I pulled the handle. Quote, pulled the handle down. Then the program crashed, and it asked me what to go, and it showed me up.
Just like the real thing.
Just like the real thing. And all these coins started coming out of my Astrocade. I was so happy. No, that didn't work that way. That would be great, though. Yeah, I actually had a friend who used to. This was back in the 90s when they first started opening casinos here in Albuquerque, and there was a machine that paid out to a customer, and the same customer was so excited. They didn't win a lot, but they put some more coins back in it, and they won again, and they kept winning. They finally came along pretty quickly. The machine, it was broken, and it was paying out on every pull. So I guess he got to keep the money he got, though, because it wasn't too much, but he was winning each pull, and it was an effective machine, so they closed it down.
That would probably be much easier to arrange on your Astrocade basic program.
Right, it sure would. So on pages 60 and 61, we've got the program listing. It's got a short description of how it works next to each program line. Plus, it even has a flow chart, which, how often do you see that? Not often.
Yeah.
Pretty neat, though. So we'll move on to the music tutorial. I wrote quite a few comments here, or not comments really, but this is a program not a program, but a tutorial written by Chuck Tumka that talks about, quote, the music synthesizer. And I actually, several years back, 3-4 years ago, I took this program and I ran it through some optical recognition software, and it's available to read that way, which is a little easier because there were some issues with it, and that were corrected later, and I integrated it all together. So I wanted to give basically a summary of what this tutorial does. The synthesizer circuit, which is contained wholly within the 40-pin custom I/O chip, is a very versatile circuit which contains counters and amplifiers to give the programmer tremendous control over the 3-voice output, along with tremolo, vibrato, and even a noise generator. The output frequency range is very accurately adjustable from less than 14 Hz to ultrasonic frequencies. The upper limit may be set by the capacity of your TV sound system. The tutorial is actually made up of 2 parts. There's this one, which is printed on pages 62 to 66, so it's 4 pages. This is why this is a long issue. And next month, we'll go over, I guess, part 2 a little bit, and that's about 3 pages long, or something like that. The tutorial has 4 programs here. I'm not sure if they're all printed in this one. I think they are. There's a sound graph, which is a Bally basic program that allows access to the sound ports and makes a simple graph of the results. There's Touch Tone Simulate, which is that program you were mentioning. It's a Bally basic program that can be used to dial a phone number. And when I actually typed this in years ago, and that's how it was archived, but I actually tried it, and at the time I still had a landline, and I dialed a phone number with it, so it works pretty good. The sound synthesizer as perceived by Chuck Tomka, which is a visual overview of the sound ports. I remember Brett Bilberry said that this has some errors, but he couldn't remember what they were. I wrote here, these tutorials have been extracted from the 2 different issues of the Arcadian newsletter and combined into one PDF format, which you can download. So on page 67, we have a program. Do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, it gets pretty technical about how he's actually describing how they're generating the tones, and he kind of figures out exactly how to calculate the frequencies and everything.
Yeah.
So it was, kind of difficult to understand, but pretty interesting that he went into that much detail. And, I do think it really shows off the capabilities of the sound system. The three-voice music was really impressive for that time.
Yeah, it sure was. Yeah, I don't think he actually makes three-voice music, though, does he? I don't think he does. I think he's only, using one voice at a time. I mean, that comes up soon enough. I mean, well, not too soon, but before too long, people...
Well, I was just talking about how he's kind of describing the capabilities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which people took advantage of this. I mean, I don't know if this is where Brett Bilberry got his information and George Moses and all that, and they worked together to make the three-voice music. I think they called it the three-voice music assembler. Is that what they called it eventually? Which was used to make the music in three voices, if you can believe it.
So the other thing I'd put in my notes here was that we actually have a recording of a phone conversation between Bob and Chuck that were discussing the same subject. So that gets extremely technical, as I recall.
Oh, I haven't actually listened to that. I'll put a note to write this down. Let's see, conversation here, so that I can put in the show notes. Conversation with Bob. All right. So next up we have the memory display program. This is by Chuck Tomka. It's a machine language utility for BASIC. This program displays input memory locations for both hexadecimal format with hex pairs in reverse order and Bally basic decimal format. It will do all whole blocks and dumps by starting and ending addresses. And this is archived in 300 baud format. I think it's programs like this that allowed people to start looking at the onboard 8K ROM and start figuring out slowly but surely how it was, what it did. So. And eventually, people were able to get the source code, but I don't think right away. So there's a program called Square Root by Dave Stocker. This is the Arcadian does not give any comments at all what this program does, although the name, of course, implies that the program calculates the square root in BASIC. It would be impossible to know that while running the program, as it gives no indication of what the program is asking for at the input prompt. Only a look through the code would give a hint of that information. This program is archived in 300 baud format. Then there's another program by David Stocker called Distance Between 2 Points. The Arcadian has no comments about this program either, though from the title it can only be surmised that this is an 18-line Bally basic program that calculates, guess what? The distance between 2 points. So let's see, we're up to page 68, which is that the last page? Yeah, this is the final page. So how you doing on time? Do you have I don't know if you've got anything going on this evening?
No, we can go on.
Okay. So here we've got some more ads. Do you have any notes written on the ads, or should I talk about what I have here?
There's not a whole lot of details. We do have, Chess by John Collins.
Yeah.
Which, that, as far as I know, there was never really a computer AI for a chess program on the system. So I think this was just a two-player chessboard.
It is. It was printed in the 1984 issue, the October 84 issue of the Arcadian as Bally chessboard. So it is available. Otherwise, I don't think it would be because I've never come across it otherwise. Program listings available from Ron Schwenk for Mastermind Batnum, which is 20 cents each. Craps, which is 10 cents.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, it is. Mastermind and Batnum are available as basic listings on BallyAlley.com. There actually, I don't think, is any version that's been typed in. I was taking a look. So if there's any listeners out there who've been really have this great urge to type in a Bally basic program, it's actually not that hard. I'm making a joke, but I've been doing it recently, and you type them into a text file and then use these programs that Paul was talking about earlier, and you can actually convert them from a text file into a WAV format that can be loaded on a real Bally. So it's actually not as hard as you might think it is. Let's see. Scott Waldinger is offering 10 programs for sale on tape for between $2 and $4. And the 4 programs are Connect 4, Craps 2, Horse Race, Robot War, Sea Battle, Slot Machine, Star Wars, Starship, Star Trek, and Tic-Tac-Toe. And none of these have been digitally archived, actually, but the basic listings are available. And for those who want to type them in, there you go.
Yeah.
Have a ball. I'll provide a list of show notes for all of you to type them in. Don't all do it at once, okay?
Yeah, we've got to, divvy them up so everyone, so we don't have 10 people typing in Slot Machine.
Let's see. Bob mentions that there's 2 basic books that have been recommended by readers: A Guided Tour of Computer Programming in BASIC by Dyer and Cofton, and 57 Practical Basic Programs in BASIC by Tracton. Bob received a couple of programs that were modified from the latter book. And I actually own the 57 Practical Programs and Games in BASIC, and I totally forgot. I was going to pull it out and look through it and see if any of the programs that were mentioned here were from there. Because some of them probably are. I mean, a lot of these programs that are printed in the early issues are just taken from, well, not taken directly, but they're based on programs from basic listings from like Creative Computing and things like that.
Yeah, you probably had to modify them to work in Tiny Basic. But it was definitely the...
If nothing else, they were inspiration. I mean, even if they couldn't be followed that closely. Tim Hayes is offering service, a 3-octave piano-like keyboard, hand-wiring Bally Basic into the Bally. Let me start that over. Hold on. Tim Hayes is offering services, a 3-octave piano-like keyboard, which I think is hardware? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what he means there. Hardwiring Bally Basic directly into the Bally, which that means you don't have to use the cartridge, which is kind of weird, and a sound output in other programs. So it's interesting to think that Tim probably done that for himself, where I guess he would just turn on his system or just come up with Bally? Or with Bally Basic? Interesting, right?
Yeah, I don't remember that being mentioned elsewhere.
Yeah. Bob says that he's been getting a lot of complaints on the Arcadian newsletter, or not complaints, let me say that again. Bob says that he's been getting a lot of compliments on the Arcadian newsletter, but he wants to make it clear that he is only relating material that is sent to him from subscribers, so they deserve all of the credit. And here's the part where Bob does mention that some of the programs printed are rework games mentioned in ads are from the 24 tested ready-to-run programs in BASIC by Tracton and Basic Computer Games by David Ahl, editor of Creative Computing magazine. And that is the end of that issue. Next month we'll cover 2 more. As I said before, I am really enjoying going through them like this. It's going through them with a fine-tooth comb and makes me go through the Bob Fabris collection and check things out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's definitely things I hadn't realized or had forgotten about.
Yeah, mostly forgotten about for me anyway, because I think back in the 90s, I read, mostly I didn't have the last issue. In fact, I like the Arcadian at the end of volumes, there's 7 volumes of the Arcadian, and at the end of volume 6, Bob announces, this is the last issue, there's no more, that's it. And when I got my collection of Arcadians, I was told it was complete, and it was volumes 1 through 6. And the only way I got volume 7 was because Bob Fabris sent me a CD that had, this was in like 2001, he sent me a CD that someone had scanned in volume 7 for him personally, so he sent that to me. So the ones that are up on Bally Alley were actually scanned for Bob, and he sent it to me. So I mean, by now I'd have them, because now I have the issues, but at the time I didn't, so I was glad he was able to do that, so thank you, Bob. So we're going to be covering 6 letters. The first one we're going to cover is, I have it labeled as a price sheet by Schwenk Enterprises, and it's written by Ron Schwenk, and it was written on February 2nd, 1979.
Yes, similar to Guy McLemore, Ron Schwenk is a dealer who also did some of his own programming. Mm-hmm. He lists his prices for cartridges, and they're a pretty good deal. The list price was about $20 to $25, but you could actually get a small discount ordering from him. Yeah.
I noticed he had 2 different prices. One that was for cash price, and one or check, I guess, and one where he charged you for using a credit card, which I guess he was just passing on what was being charged to him, I suppose.
Yeah, there's fees associated, but yeah, a little unusual.
Yeah.
So let's see, he mentions his Mastermind program, which is in BASIC, and it's, one, like you said, that we have a listing of, but I don't think we have a digital version.
Yeah, it's actually, we have a listing of, and it's in the archives, but it's not been added to Bally Alley, so I actually put a note here that I need to do that.
Yeah, so he mentions that Star Battle's out now, and that's one we'd seen originally announced as Space Race and then renamed. Yeah. And Ron doesn't like the program.
Not at all.
And that seems like one of the less popular cartridges they released.
Yeah. There's I have no love for that program. It's I don't quite understand how to control it. It seems counterintuitive. Like sometimes you can move it in one direction. First of all, it's an early game, and it's only 2K, and it's like a Star Wars going down the trench sort of game, But that's the gimmick, and there's not much to it. Although 2 players can play at once, which is kind of nice. One guy can be the, I guess, I'm not going to call them anything from Star Wars, but they do look similar to TIE Fighters, but they're not, of course. And there's something that looks similar to an X-Wing, but it's not, of course, because this is not Star Wars.
Yeah, it's the Y-Wing or something.
Let's see. What else we got here about him?
He mentions that football's out as well, and he likes that game.
Yeah, he says it's pretty good. And, something he likes about it, which I thought was pretty, he says, they even have music with vibrato. It sure sounds good. And when he mentioned that he ran out of them when he was selling them, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, so I thought one of the interesting things is you get a little detail on how Bob's kind of working with some of the dealers. So, he's helping Ron get referrals and sharing his mailing list.
Yeah. Something, Ron also sells the systems, and I wanted to mention how much he charges for them, because the list price for them is $329, and he sells them for $289, which, so even in 79, February of 79, you could get them for around $300, which isn't, I don't know how much the 2600 was selling for at the time, but it's also a totally different machine than the 2600. It has way more capability, and it's so much better. Yeah, the library's not quite as big though, right?
Yeah, a little difference there. Unless you count the basic games.
Yeah, that's true. In which case, it's probably got a larger library. But I don't think we should count those. And it's because we've got 12 versions of Slot Machine, and they're all equally as good,
Yeah.
So I don't have anything else to add about that. Do you have anything final comments on that one?
No, I think that's good.
All right. So let's move on to the next letter, which is from May 28th, 1979. And this is from R.M. Martin. I don't know who R.M. is, so I call him Mr. Martin. I'm going to cover this one a little bit first, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Mr. Martin has some programming questions for Bob Fabris. Along with his letter, I did find some handwritten notes that Mr. Fabris prepared to answer the questions that he asked, which is kind of cool. And when I made this into a PDF, which I sent along to you, they were in there. Mr. Martin says that his checkers game by John Collins, it cheats. This game was printed in the May 1979 issue of the Arcadian, and as usually occurred, there are errors in the original listing. The June 1979 issue of the Arcadian printed some corrections, which is the one we talked about. I guess maybe we didn't mention them, but there were corrections in there. Hopefully those got Mr. Martin fixed up. Over the years, John Collins revisited his checker programs, eventually making 2 major updates and calling them, quite originally, Checkers 2 and Checkers 3. Mr. Martin asks how he can convert Star Trek and Wumpus written for other computers that have read-in data statements. The Bally doesn't support these commands, and he wonders how he can work around this limitation of Bally Basic. All of the information in this letter is pretty typical for much of the correspondence that is written to the Arcadian. It's this letter's last paragraph that made me choose to include it in this podcast. Mr. Martin says, and I quote, "You are doing one hell of a job. I have learned more about computers than I thought I ever would. Thanks." End quote. I'm not sure if this is an accurate summary of Mr. Martin, but I picture him as somebody who purchases Bally Arcade to play games, and then he stumbled into the Arcadian newsletter, bought Bally Basic, and was delving into his game system after realizing it could do much more than he originally thought was possible, which is sort of what I mentioned earlier. So
I did think it was interesting that we had kind of a draft of Bob's response to him, and that does, show you that he was really giving a lot of individual attention to the people who wrote in and, trying to help them with getting the programs running and everything.
Yeah, which seems like it would have taken a lot of work. I'm glad you brought that up because, first he would, this is not unusual at all. There's tons of, drafts of stuff that Bob wrote that are in a collection, and I imagine he either rewrote it or typed it, or eventually I know he bought an Apple, so maybe he typed it on his Apple and sent them off that way. But it's like 3 pages of notes, the draft that's included here, and it's pretty detailed, and it must have been pretty interesting getting responses from Bob.
Yeah.
To your personal letter that says, "Hey, my checkers program's not working. It's cheating. What's going on here?" When obviously it was probably just a typing error on his part. But hey, what are you going to do? So next up, we have a letter by Guy Micklemore from May 29th, 1979. Do you have some notes?
Yeah, one thing is he discusses tape programs, And you again see the early problems with getting programs to work. Like you've got some issues with Simon by Brett Bilbrey. And, I think those were, eventually had all the needed corrections printed in the Arcadian. So Guy was pretty impressed with the Checkers program by John Perkins. We've also discussed that one.
Well, his program must have not have cheated then. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, he likes Star Trek by Scott Waldinger. That's one we'd seen advertised, but someone's going to have to type that one in, I guess.
Yeah, that's available to type in, but it's not archived.
Yeah, he submits a program that Guy called Skyrocket, but was actually printed in the Arcadian as the logo.
Yeah. And not only is it printed in the Arcadian's logo, but that kind of became the logo for the Arcadian.
Yeah, exactly. That's the name.
Yeah. So...
Yeah, and this, I guess I'll go ahead and mention it since it's about the same subject. But on his next letter, Bob mentions that he likes the program, and he actually, in this case, made some additions to it. So Guy talks about the add under, and I guess Bob had mentioned to him that he didn't think it was being released, and Guy is agreeing at this point that it's probably not going to come out.
Yeah.
Which was prescience.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really familiar with this, but I guess Guy had been working on a light pen. Yeah, that's yet another peripheral that Bally was planning on making, but never actually released. Yeah,
I put some notes about that here. I put he's working on a light pen. The work is currently stalled, but if he gets it working, then he plans to sell it through the Arcadian. But I don't think that ever happened. Some people in the Bally community did end up creating their own light pens, among them Craig Anderson and Leroy Flam. The light pen was supposed to be used with the Creative Crayon cartridge, which was never released. And I don't even think a prototype of that cartridge has ever come to light, has there?
I don't remember what it was called. I thought that it did come out in some form.
Well,
as a prototype.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember if it's because there's a couple of things out there that are like drawing programs, but nothing that would use a light pen, unless they just ditched that idea entirely. So maybe that's what they did. I don't know.
Yeah, I might have to look that up.
If you know about it, I'd like to check it out, actually. There's actually a light pen program, or two light pen programs, I think, archived in Bally Alley. Of course, I've never been able to use them because I don't have a light pen. But there are sort of instructions that were written by Leroy Flam that Mike White gave to me back in the early 2000s that are scanned and up online. So if there's any tech heads out there that want a little project, why don't you go ahead and build yourself a light pen and let us know how it works out for you? I mean, you've got to use the port for something.
Yeah, it is. You do have the light pen port, although that is, I believe, what you plug the 300 baud interface into.
Yeah, you plug it into that and also into port number 3, or joystick port number, or excuse me, not joystick, hand controller port number 3.
Yeah. Do you have anything else on this letter?
Just one more thing. Bally's National Service Manager told Guy that they plan to revise the Hacker's Manual, make it into an Advanced Operations Manual. This never occurred. It seems that Guy already had his doubts about it being released, for he mentions to Bob that if Bally falls through with this project, then he thinks that someone, maybe even himself, should make such a manual for the Bally Arcade. Sadly, that never occurred. Although, in a way, the revised Astro Basic Manual does include much more information than the original Bally Basic Manual. So it's not quite what he's talking about, but it does provide many programming examples that weren't in the original version of the program. So that's kind of helpful. Yeah, so that's the last I've got for that one.
All right. Do you want to move on to Guy's next letter next?
Well, the next one I have, because I have them, the order I have them in is actually in the order from date rather than like who they're from, but we can skip ahead to that one. Let's do that one, and then we'll go backwards. Okay. This letter is from June 14th, 1979.
Yeah, so one part of this letter I found particularly interesting was that, Guy was, of course, in a pretty unique position because he was a dealer as well as being an enthusiast for the system.
Right.
So he's meeting with Bally's national sales manager and, wants to take the opportunity to give his opinion.
Yeah.
And here I'll quote Guy's letter.
Okay.
The potential is there for Bally to wrap up a large chunk of the personal computer market, but they are blowing it by holding up the keyboard, by failing to provide adequate documentation for Bally Basic, and by failing to properly promote the system, service current customers, and provide software. So I basically read this as they would be winning this market if they did everything differently.
Right, yeah, he does. Which he goes on to say that he's just seen information on the new Atari system coming out, and Bally is going to lose customers to this new system if it doesn't provide the keyboard fast. So yeah, he's referring to the Atari 400 and 800 that eventually came out in I think the fall of 1979. And
yeah, I looked that up. So they'd been announced in December 1978, and they came out November 1979.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess yeah, and those are great systems. It's, the Atari 8-bits I've probably mentioned before are my favorite home computers, and I use them all the time still. They're great fun. I have a 130XE sitting right next to my Bally. I should probably take a picture of that, and it's kind of fun. Of course, my Bally is naked. It's got no top on it, so I don't know. So, yeah. By the way, the national sales manager, I'm guessing that he was going to meet with, that would be Jack Nyman. Was that probably right? He doesn't say.
Was there just one, or?
I don't know. I did look up that he was, a sales manager at that time, but I don't know for sure. Guy is, quote, encouraging all local Bally owners to write Bally, encouraging a firmer commitment to expansion of the unit and demanding definite answers on the keyboard. He goes on to say, if all 600 plus Arcadians would write, maybe it would make a difference. Unfortunately, Bally is in the unique position of being able to well afford to ignore the public demand, since their income from consumer products is only a tiny, tiny fraction of their total income. They just don't seem to give a damn one way or the other, end quote. So I guess were they already making slot machines? There's another slot machine. My goodness. Were they already making, did they already have their arcade open? I guess they don't have their arcade.
It seems like we talked about the casinos.
Yeah.
The last podcast maybe.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So yeah, it's too bad Bally didn't make a cartridge called Slot Machine. I mean, they were in a perfect position for it.
Yeah.
Guy has, quote, given Bob Fabris his address to 2 or 3 Bally owners in his area that he contacted through the Evansville Computer Club. One man Guy talked to was frankly flabbergasted at all the information that was left out of the manual. Guy showed him how to control the left and right color boundary, the music oscillator and vibrato controls, the extra commands like ABS and peek and poke functions, ROM subroutines, etc., and the man nearly lost his teeth. Which I've never actually heard that expression before, so I don't really know what it means. Do you know what that means?
I assume it just means he was really impressed.
So maybe he was wearing dentures and he did lose his teeth. I really don't know. Yeah. He echoed the sentiments of so many others. This man said, "Why doesn't Bally let people know what they have here?" And they really never do, because pretty soon, by the end of 1979, they give up on the Bally and they put it up for sale.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're probably pretty lucky if you were getting your system through somewhere like ABC Hobbycraft, and you could, get all that information.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Guy mentions that his light pen still doesn't work. As Guy says, and this is the part that I was referencing earlier, he says, "This is unofficial and as yet not for publication until now, but I am negotiating with a major wargaming wholesaler in the East to supply him with game support software for the Bally system. He intends to become a Bally wholesaler and will deal with Bally dealers by mail order if this goes through. I will be acting as a consultant on this project. Nothing is settled yet, but if it works out, we may be able to provide Bally dealers nationwide, I'm getting too excited there, with a source of reliable software. If you wish, you may run in the Arcadian that I am interested in hearing from programmers who wish to license or sell their software. I can make no promises yet, though. It might help if I could give them some idea of these programs' availability, reliability, and such." Guy added, in a handwritten note here, he says, again, P.S., hold off on this. Negotiating still proceeding, but slowly. As far as I can remember, nothing ever happened about this, but then again, if this was discussed only through letters, I might run across this again. But it would have been really neat if there had been some role-playing game or something released, or even a dealer that was interested in that kind of stuff, because at this time, one of my favorite games for the 8-bit systems in general is Temple of Apshai trilogy, and the Temple of Apshai came out in 1979 by Automated Simulations, later called Epics. And I'm not saying that this would have been something that would have happened for the Bally, but wouldn't it have been interesting if it had,
Yeah.
Something like that. And since that program was written in BASIC. It's people have taken the version that did come out and they ported them to other systems that never had it, because apparently it's for programmers. Like apparently it's not too hard to do. Let's see. Do you have anything else? I have one other thing here, but I don't want to cut you off here or anything.
I thought the last part was kind of interesting when Guy was, tipping Bob off that he thought someone was selling Bob Weeper's programs unauthorized.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, it doesn't sound like you really knew that for sure, though, so who knows?
I took that with kind of a grain of salt because, he doesn't know for sure, and he basically says that, if I recall, because I didn't take notes on that part, but that he saw a program that had the same name for the Apple by Bob Weber that he presumes was the same program, but I don't know that he knew for sure. And so he was wondering if Bob knew about this. So I'm guessing he was...
Yeah. Now was it for the Apple, or was it that... I thought that was the name of the computer store.
I didn't take a note, so I don't know. Was that only the name of the computer store? Okay.
Yeah, I think it says Apple TV and Computing. Okay.
I just remember the word Apple, so it's... I wonder how unusual that would have been if that was occurring.
I don't think there were probably not a whole lot of stores that were selling BASIC software, but I could definitely see piracy being an issue because it was so easy to copy, obviously.
Right. Yeah. And even when it wasn't so easy to copy, all it took was one person to crack it, and you could. Well, I guess back then, if you didn't have a modem, though, you didn't get it too easily, but. I got my Commodore 64, and I used to get programs from people from school. Like I'd give them a disk, and they would exchange programs that way. And I bought my fair share, but I got a lot of programs that were not from the store.
Yeah.
Guy makes a point here that I've noticed over the years when reading the instructions for software submitted on tape. Guy says. So far, most of the Bally software I've seen is pretty amateurist in terms of presentation and documentation, while being surprisingly sophisticated in terms of actual program writing. What is needed is a tutorial on documentation, and my submission for this is in an article. Let me repeat that. What is needed is a tutorial on documentation, and my submission for such an article is enclosed. An improperly documented program is almost as bad as no program at all, end quote. And unfortunately, I didn't ever find his documentation or this article that he wrote. But I don't know if he gets that impression because, like, a lot of times the programs that are printed in the Arcadian don't actually have the documentation that is pretty often included with them.
Yeah.
Or if he's talking about, like, maybe some of the stuff he, like, wrote. He, like you said, he's a dealer, so he probably got to see, like, stuff that other people didn't normally see.
Yeah.
Guy, if you're out there, and you might be, because if you actually want to have any comments about this, let us know, because I know you're a member of the group and you're post once in a while. So if you're actually listening to the podcast, let us know.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the case, but I kind of wondered if that comment about wanting more documentation was one of the reasons why some of these latest issues had actually included some documentation.
Oh, that's a good point. I would have made that connection. That could be. Maybe Bob. Maybe that's why Bob pumped up this, or the what was it, July 1979 issue up to 14 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that about is the last of that one. I'm going to head back and cover the one. It's a letter from Lawrence Lesk. Actually, I think he's known as Larry Lesk normally. This is to Bob Fabris, and this is written June 6th, 1979. Maybe I can cover what I have here, and then if you have anything to add, you can do that.
Okay.
And I'm gonna, please interrupt me because I don't want to. Otherwise it's gonna be a monologue, and I don't want it to sound that way. So please, at any time, just say, "Hey, I've got something to say." This is a letter that Bob Fabris wrote to Larry Lesk, an employee at Bally. I tried to find out what he did, by the way, and I couldn't. Bob is hoping to get some information on the internal workings of the Bally system, and Bob says, and this is kind of a long quote, it's 2 paragraphs, "I publish a newsletter for owners of the arcade and provide them with material which enables them to better understand the machine and which informs them of operations that are possible. The inputs for my paper come primarily from the more technically oriented subscribers. I now have over 600 persons subscribing from across the country, Canada, plus a handful of foreign. We are all concerned about the status of the add-on, or the programmable keyboard. We have the Bally story of, quote, waiting for the FCC to act on the TI proposal, end quote. But we have also been waiting since last year when the add-on was originally expected. Many of the subscribers responded to the JSNA advertising of October 1977, which I think was actually in September 77, and we are quite frustrated with the situation. He goes on to say, we would be greatly interested in a surrogate keyboard with additional memory capacity and capabilities approaching those which are advertised in the literature, a more powerful BASIC and a full-size ASCII keyboard, at least. In addition, the units should have some equivalent to graphics, ZGRAS, and terse, etc. languages, if at all possible. And that's all I'm going to. That's the end of the quote here. And I don't mention this in my notes, but now that I'm rereading this, it's kind of interesting that he mentions terse. I wonder how. I guess since he's Bob Fabris and he was publishing this, but terse was the language that was used to write some of the arcade programs. I think. I wish I knew more about that.
Yes, is that the language that Brett Bilbrey was saying that some of the later Astrocade cartridges were developed in? I
think so. I know for sure that I think Wizard of Wor or Gore for something was written in terse. And there's I guess Jamie Fenton has the source code for that stuff, but I still don't think it's been archived. And even if it was archived, it's written in a language that there's no compiler for. So it's there's no surviving compilers. So I don't know what you do with the source code exactly, except I guess it would still help you understand the program on some level.
Yeah.
Now, before I continue... go ahead.
So, I was just going to ask, where did you get your information that Lawrence was a Bally employee? I know it seems a little odd that, because Lawrence was kind of working on a sort of homebrew expansion, so it seems strange that he'd be almost competing with his own company.
I'm going to get to that here in a second, actually. Before I continue with Bob's letter, I want to say how fascinating I find Bob's statements. He's basically writing a letter to Bally saying, hey, buddy, we can't wait anymore for your delayed keyboard add-on, so we're going to make our own. Imagine this happening today. You'd probably get a cease and desist letter from the manufacturer. Times really have changed. You know what I mean? Like, could you imagine if, Nintendo was going to make something for their Wii U that turned it into a computer, and you got tired of waiting, and you decided to come out with that on your own? I guess maybe you could.
Yeah. I don't know. It depends. I mean, people make their own controllers, third parties and things. Yeah. So, yeah, it really depends on what it is you're developing, I think.
Yeah, but I guess what's weird to me is that it would be like writing to Nintendo and say, tell me how your system works. Well, I guess maybe that's not that unusual. I don't know. It seems unusual, but maybe it's not. Listeners, what do you think? Right. Bob continues, I'm writing this letter on Jay Hess's recommendation to let you know that we are a group that we exist as a group and are interested in upgrading the system to higher capabilities. Of my group, I would suspect that 70 to 80% would be in a position to purchase a unit in the $400 to $600 range. I would be pleased to receive your comments and thoughts about our quote problem and to answer any questions you may have. All right, so this is where I got that information from about who this guy was. While searching the Bally Alley website for additional information on Larry Lesk, I found a quote from an article called In the Mind of Tom DeFonte, Inventor of ZGRAS by Susan D. Prince. This was printed in the June-July 1982 issue of Business Screen. So the reason I have this on Bally Alley at all, by the way, is back in 2001 when Tom DeFonte, when he sent me a whole bunch of information, this was one of the he sent me a whole bunch of photocopies of old magazine articles on ZGRAS and stuff like that, which is all on Bally Alley, but this was something that was in there, and I didn't OCR any of this, but here's a quote, and I find it pretty interesting. He says, about this time, and he doesn't say when this is, but it's about 76 or 77, another friend, Larry Lesk, decided he could no longer afford to remain a student at the University of Chicago, and he went to work for Bally Manufacturing Company, the game producer. There he discovered the Bally Professional Arcade System, a fully assembled home computer game unit Bally planned to market to the public. Lesk started programming on the arcade, and believe me, he nearly knocked our socks off. Two others, Jay Fenton, a top programmer and developer of Bally Basic, and Nola Donato, a language programmer, and I quickly wrote all of the code for this new form, Lesk based on ZGRAS. In 1979, Bally brought out the arcade and its new software written in ZGRAS, which, by the way, is a mistake. That's what he says, but it's not accurate, because the Bally Professional Arcade came out in 78, and ZGRAS was never released. The full article can be read online.
Those phone calls do kind of give a little more context. So, Mr. Lesk did start working on kind of a homebrew expansion, but then he actually put the project on hold when it appeared that Fidelity Electronics would be taking over the system and reviving their expansion plans. So I noted that, again, we see how this whole indecision on whether the expansion is coming out or not makes it difficult for the homebrew developers to decide what to actually do with it.
Right, yeah. And to put things in context for the listeners, Fidelity Electronics, when Bally was selling the company, they were in the running to buy it. They didn't. It ended up being sold to Astrocade Inc., or I guess Astrovision Inc., what they were called at first. But so I guess it took almost a year, I think, before the sale went through, and finally it started being produced again. So there was quite a while when it was difficult to get a Bally arcade. Maybe not as difficult as it is now, but but it was difficult even in 1980 to get your hands on an arcade because they weren't being made at the time. I find the Z-Grass really interesting, and after I read that article and I found that, I was like, there's so much that I haven't actually read. Like, I posted all these articles on BallyAlley.com, but I haven't really read them all, which is the same with a lot of the stuff I post on Bally Alley. It's just too much to read.
Yeah.
And I was thinking maybe it would make kind of a neat segment, maybe cover one Z-Grass article, even if it's just 5 minutes, and just say, hey, this is what's in this article. Why don't you take a look at it? It's kind of interesting. I don't know. Maybe. All right. So the last letter we have here is by John Sweeney. It's from July 14th, 1979. This letter is a double-spaced 9-page typewritten letter. It's pretty long, and it's going to be available on Bally Alley, and people who are into hardware might be interested in reading this in detail. John laments about the new delay in the keyboard add-under. John gave up waiting for the add-under already, and he has purchased a TRS-80 with the money he set aside for the keyboard expansion. Way to go, Bally, right? However, he still has plans to use his Bally Arcade. In fact, he plans to get the two systems talking to one another. He has enclosed the schematic for the main logic. I guess I should go back to that real quick. He's not the only one who does that. There's other people who buy TRS-80s, and some of them actually do get the systems talking to one another. And it was Brett Bilberry who actually used his TRS-80 to program his two cartridges for the Bally Astrocade, which I think is pretty neat. Anyway, John goes on and he's enclosed a schematic for the main logic components for a memory expansion that he created for the Bally Arcade. John assembled it with, he says, wire wrap on a 4 by 4 1/4 by 4 1/2 inch vector board mounted in a Radio Shack instrument cabinet. Actually, the mechanical problems of getting the signals out of the Bally and arranging the power supplies and cabinet were more formidable than any of the electronic or logic problems, save one, which he actually doesn't mention. As drawn, the schematic provides up to 8K of additional RAM. At this moment, I have 3K installed, and the last 32 addresses at the top of the space are decoded to provide I/O and other special purposes. John goes into great detail, which I'm not going to cover here, about how his RAM expansion actually works. He provides a list of parts, too. Any listeners who are hardware hackers will probably be interested in at least skimming the letter. This information was never published in the Arcadian newsletter, as far as I can remember anyway, but I suspect that it was probably shared among some of the Arcadian subscribers. The hardware and software projects that were created for the Bally Arcade users in the late 70s and early 80s seem to fit very close with what homebrewers on 8-bit and 16-bit classic gaming systems and computers are creating today. The Bally system is hardly unique in this respect, even for its time of release. The Apple II, TRS-80, Commodore, and S100 users all were hacking away nimbly at their systems. The difference, to me at least, is that we don't look at the Bally Arcade system today as a computer, but rather as a game system, in the same vein as the Atari VCS or perhaps the Intellivision. In 1978, one didn't bring home the Atari VCS and start adding RAM to it. Atari owners played Combat. They had great fun doing it, and so did I, actually. Maybe not in 78, though, or 77. But maybe the Bally users had a type of fun that Atari game system owners couldn't touch, the fun of learning a system and creating with it. And that's my notes for that.
Did you mention that it was 3K of RAM that he added?
Yeah, it was 3K. Which is
that's smaller than most of the expansions that actually were sold.
Yeah, the smallest one, the Blue RAM, was originally released with 4K.
Yeah.
He doesn't mention what he's using this memory for, because Bally Basic, unfortunately, is unable to use anything more than 1.8K. At least at first, people started using it to store variables and I think strings or something, string arrays or something like that. But it's not normal. It can't be used for programming space. If you want to use extra RAM for programming space, you either have to use ViperSoft Basic or Blue RAM Basic, which obviously, since there were no RAM expansions yet, those didn't exist.
Right.
So either he was
got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So either he was I don't know, maybe he was programming in machine language. I don't know what he was using his extra RAM for. It's kind of like a chicken before the egg thing.
Yeah,
or egg
exactly.
Before, yeah. So that's about all I've got. Do you have anything more to add about any of these letters? I find it really fascinating to go through these. I'm going to probably say this every single episode. And if I sound like a broken record, I'm sorry, but it's really fun, and I'm glad I'm doing this. It gives me a reason to read through and discover these weird things.
Yeah, it gets pretty technical going through some of them, but, even if you don't understand all the details, it's just impressive that, people are building their own RAM expansions and light pins and all that.
Yeah. It would be neat to see if we can't get someone on the group. Maybe I could bring this up, actually, or maybe I could just. I was joking earlier when I said it'd be neat to see someone make a light pen. But if anyone actually out there is inclined and really would be interested in doing this, I would love to see one. I'm not looking to someone to like make a project and build it for the whole community. I would just like to see one, be made. There's software out there that exists already. There's sort of schematics on how to do it. There's people who've made light pens for the Vectrex, and that maybe it did come out, but they're hard to find. But there was a drawing program, like an artist program or something. I've never used it, but people have done it on the Vectrex and probably other systems. So I would like to see it. If someone wants to make one, I'd love to see a video about it, or just hear someone write in about it and say, hey, I made one, it works pretty cool. Haha, you don't have one. That's fine. I'd read that feedback. Next up is a full review of The Incredible Wizard by Joe Santulli. This was written in the January-February 1996 issue of the Digital Press newsletter, which was issue number 28. I actually contacted Joe, and he gave me permission to read this for the Bally Alley Astrocast. Before I actually start reading this review of The Incredible Wizard that Joe wrote, I do want to give a little bit of background about the Digital Press newsletter. People who are listening to podcasts, I'm not sure if you're aware about the history of the newsletters from the 90s and sometimes the 2000s. Before the internet was really big and the forums were really big and the news groups, there was a time period when there was kind of a lull in the classic gaming conversation. Part of it was because the old game systems had gone away, and there really weren't too many used video game stores around, and the only way to get these things were at yard sales and things like that. But also there was no way for people to communicate with each other. So some enterprising people came up with the idea of newsletters. The earliest one that I'm aware of is the 2600 connection. I think that started in 1990. And Tim Duart, who gave us some feedback for this podcast, he started that up, and it ran for over a decade. I can't remember exactly when it stopped, but I got the last issue, which was actually printed in color, which I thought was pretty neat. I think that was issue 100. Compared to how many issues of my newsletter, and there was just 12 issues of that, and that ran from mine came December 1994 to 1998, so it was about every 2 months it came out, something like that. And then there was a big pause after the third issue and before Chris started and jumped on board. So these newsletters were pretty important, and in particular I remember reading this review of The Incredible Wizard by Joe, and I remember exactly where I was. I used to live in an apartment complex here in Albuquerque, and there was a nearby International House for Pancakes, IHOP, and I walked over there and I was having dinner, and I was reading this issue, the January-February issue of 1996, and I came across this review of The Incredible Wizard. And I was pretty impressed because other people talked about the Vectrex and the 2600 and the 5200, and especially the ColecoVision. That seemed like a really popular system at the time. The Astrocade was overlooked pretty often. So I was already a fan of the Astrocade back then, and I remember coming across this and thinking, wow, I'm not the only fan of the system, check it out. So I'm going to read this in its entirety, and if you can try to put yourself into 1996, maybe never having heard of the Bally Astrocade before, and but you're interested in classic gaming, and maybe the ColecoVision was your game of choice, and so you got back into it, and so you somehow heard of the Digital Press newsletter. I'm not sure Joe, how did you get your word out about that newsletter? Let me know. And because I know I got my word out through, I guess I did it through Digital Press, but I heard of Digital Press through the Atari 2600 connection, or 2600 connection, I guess it was called. So here's what Joe has to say. There have been very few games over the years that have shaped an entire video game generation, specifically my circle of gaming friends. John Madden Football for the Genesis was one of them. Rocky Super Action Boxing for the ColecoVision was another. To a lesser degree, NHL Hockey for Genesis and TV Sports Football. Remember that one, Mr. Innick? For the TurboGrafx did the same. It doesn't take long to figure out that they're all sports games, though. The only house-rocking, non-sports game that I can truly say made us understand each other as gamers is this little ditty called The Incredible Wizard, or as it was known in the arcades, Wizard of Wor. Never trust Santuli became the slogan amongst the Ringwood clan of video game players where I grew up. It was developed after several gamers, thinking they were involved in a cooperative match of warling slaying, were, quote, inadvertently shot in the back when they crossed my path. I developed this little strategy after realizing that other players were not only stealing my points, they were worth more themselves than the denizens of the maze as we were supposedly out to defeat. Even more importantly, I could always predict where that other player was going to appear again after he died, and with 5 of them lined up to go, that Joe, you're a bad man. And with 5 of them lined up to go, that was 5 times that many points I could take in my till. Call me greedy, but that strategy eventually caught on with just about everyone else I ever played this game with, including recent friends who were introduced to this game in the past month while I was preparing this review. By the way, the, quote, strategy of using the other player as point bait has stuck with me into my adult life. Streets of Rage and Gauntlet has shown a new crop of gamers a different side of me. Ha ha ha, deal with it, he says. I am happy to say that my wife shares the strategy with me, and our game sessions together make the Civil War look like a carnival game. I'm going to interrupt myself here and say one of the things I used to really enjoy about reading the Digital Press newsletter was that the sense of humor that was put into the reviews and the articles. And if anyone's interested in this, by the way, Digital Press's website, which is digitpress.com, they have, I'm pretty sure, all back issues of the newsletter available, so you can download them and read them online, which is kind of difficult to do, or you can just print them out and read them as they were originally meant to be read on a piece of paper. So here we go with the rest of this review. I wish I could tell you how many different mazes there are in this game, but I can't. It's not that I haven't tried to count them. There's definitely more than 8. It's just that we so rarely even get past the third screen blasting the hell out of each other that the other creatures in the maze become more of a distraction than a goal. The 2-player strategy in this game can really get intense. Because you can only have one bullet on the screen at a time, you have to plan carefully where and when you want to execute the other player. So it seems to me that Joe really prefers to not kill the baddies in the level. He's like, I'm out to get my friend. I'm going to have to play a game against you someday, Joe. So Joe continues that after you've gotten rid of the other player, you can lurk outside his little cubbyhole where he will pop up for his next, quote, life. He can wait there for 10 seconds, leaving at any time, but is then forced into play by the computer. It's often that 2 or 3 more lives will be lost to the lurking player, but eventually one of those damn warlocks will happen by and catch him off guard. Then it's out of the hole and back to the hunt. What a game. What a damn good game. Oh yeah, about the game. Well, the premise might be clear by now if you haven't already played it. You and another player, there is a 1-player mode too, work to clear the maze of wandering Garwars, Borwars, and other creatures with war in their names. Once they're disposed of, a really fast warlock darts around the maze trying to get out. You get a bunch of points for shooting it, plus the next level becomes double points. Randomly, the wizard himself appears, fires a bullet, then disappears again. This repeats until he either kills or is killed by a player. There's a really cool flashing effect when you kill the wizard, and an even cooler bonus. He's worth twice as much as the warlock, and an additional double score multiplier goes into effect for the next level. In fact, this is one of those games that fairly awards points. If you win, you're probably the better player and not just some lucky punk. For some reason, the Astrocade version awards points at 1/10 of the arcade value, so the warlock is only worth 100 points versus 1,000 on the arcade and other systems. The best score I can manage was 13,790, which seems really low, but I was on the 13th board. Yeah, that's pretty good, Joe. That's pretty good indeed. As I was playing this week, I think my high was in the like 2000s, which I've scored higher than that, but just when I was playing for this podcast. And here's one of the final things he has to say. If nothing else, this game proves the superiority of the Bally Astrocade over its competition. This was the same year Atari released the laughable Pac-Man for the VCS. You would never have seen graphics as good as the incredible Wizard on the Atari 2600 game at that time. And Odyssey 2 never reached this level. In fact, CBS released Wizard of Wor for the Atari 2600 a few months later, and although it is more colorful, it is also a flickerfest with bulkier and less detailed characters. The Astrocade version features subtleties that were largely ignored by most developers at the time, such as the recoiling of the gun when a shot is taken, the messages, which are "Get ready, go," and "Escaped" appear in dramatic fashion, and the really wild sounds that top just about everything from time to time. It wasn't until almost 2 full years later, when Wizard of Wor appeared on the Atari 5200, that a graphically superior version could be played. But then, you have to work with those damn non-centering controllers, a real problem on precision maze games like this. Again, the Astrocade version reigns supreme. I suppose, if the game wasn't as good as it is, even the 2-player shootout that ensues might not have made it the showstopper it was. The Incredible Wizard is one of my top 10 classic games of all time. Plugging it in again after years of dormancy didn't stifle the fun, the action, or the memories behind this gem. If you want to read this article, you can actually read it over at Digital Press's website at digitpress.com in the review section. In 2015, or maybe it was 2014, Joe gave me permission to reformat the article and put it on Bally Alley, so I'll have links to both places in the show notes. That wraps up episode 6 of the Bally Alley Astrocast. In the next episode, Michael and Paul and I are going to be covering 2 new games. Well, not new, but new to this podcast. The first one is a cartridge. It's Blastroids by Esoterica. It's released in 1983. It's a 4K cartridge. It was written by Dan Drescher and J.P. Curran. And it's a space-themed shooter where maybe you might compare it to something like Asteroids or something like that, but it's not really an Asteroids clone. The next one is a basic program. This is Haunted House. This is by New Image, written by Don Gladden, released in 1981. This is a pretty unusual game. I've never actually loaded it before or played it. It's a text adventure of sorts where you're caught in a haunted house and you have to find your way out. In most basic games, you load one 1.8K program and play it. This one is actually made up of 9 different loads. It's also a good example of how far you can stretch basic. So we'll see what we think of that. Michael doesn't have too much experience with basic programs, so I'm really curious to see what he thinks of a program that's way off the beaten path like this one. We'll find out. Finally, I just have a request for some feedback, in particular for these 2 games, Blastroids and Haunted House, but also if you have any feedback for anything that we've covered in past episodes, or anything you'd like to see covered. And especially, I'd like to know if there's anyone who has any experience with basic programs, who loaded them up, bought them back in the early 80s, typed them in. You know, the newsletters were out there, like the Arcadian and Basic Express and Cursor, and you could even buy stuff from the back of the Arcadian, and I just wonder how many people did that, and I'd like to hear some first-hand stories. So if you've got something like that for us, why don't you send it on in? ballyalley@hotmail.com, or you can also reach me via the Atari Age forums, and I'm Bally Alley. Now we're going to end the show with some music, as always. Today's music is the William Tell Overture by Rossini. This was composed for the opera William Tell, which premiered in 1829. This song is known probably most famously as the theme music from The Lone Ranger, from the television show, also from the radio show, and from the movies. Some of you may be familiar with a version of this song that was recorded by Walter Carlos for the movie A Clockwork Orange. He used the Moog synthesizer in order to do that, which kind of brings us around to the Astrocade, which is also an electronic instrument. This song was released on a cartridge called Songs. It was originally thought to be by George Moses. It was released in around 1985. It's number 2 of 21 songs and sound effects on one cartridge. You select the song or the sound effect from the menu, just like the menu that you see when the Astrocade first begins, and then it will play that song or sound effect. Some of them repeat, like Halls of the Mountain King, I think will play over and over, but slightly differently for about 20 minutes or something like that. But this one is pretty short. It's only it's only part of the overture. And anyways, so this song was not written by George Moses, and in the summer of 2001, he confirmed that he did not write this. Mike White created 12 of these cartridges, and New Image made a few of these as well. Eventually, Richard Degler revealed it was written by Scott Norris, and Scott Norris is the person who did most of the sound effects and music for many of the cartridges released by Bally and Astrocade.
You want to stop the recording?
Yeah, I can stop the recording.
Okay.
Let's stop. Oh, shh.